Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jonathan Crowley, but everyone calls me John. I've been a park ranger here in West Virginia for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could throw at me. My grandfather was a ranger, my father too. It's in our blood, I guess. The mountains have always been my home. Even after Sarah died in that cave-in 3 years ago, I stayed. My kids think I'm crazy for it. They moved away to the city and barely call anymore. They say I care more about these hills than I do about family. Maybe they're right. I work the New River Gorge area, specifically around Whisper Ridge. It's wild country up there, the kind of place where cell phones don't work and you can go days without seeing another person. That's how I like it. The silence helps me think, helps me remember Sarah without the noise of the world getting in the way. Most of my job is pretty normal stuff. I check on hikers, maintain trails, make sure people don't get lost or hurt. But my specialty is cave rescue. When someone gets trapped underground, they call me. I know every cave, every old mine shaft, every hole in the ground for 50 miles around. I've pulled more than 200 people out of tight spots over the years. The old-timers around here tell stories about these mountains. My grandfather used to sit on the porch and talk about hollow men, miners who came back wrong after cave-ins. Said they looked like people, but something was missing inside. I always figured it was just mountain talk, stories to keep kids from wandering into abandoned mines. There are a lot of those around here. Coal mines, mostly. Been closed since the 1922 when the big companies moved on. Some had accidents, cave-ins that killed dozens of men. The worst was the Whisper Ridge mine back in 1923. 47 miners died when the main shaft collapsed. They sealed it up and never looked back. The Cherokee who lived here first had their own stories about the mountains. They talked about empty ones who lived underground and stole souls. But that's all ancient history now. It was November 1988 when everything changed. The first snow was coming early that year, and a storm was building over the mountains. You could feel it in the air, that heavy, pressing feeling that means nature's about to show you who's boss. I was doing my morning rounds when the call came in on my radio. A geology team from the university had failed to check in. 4 graduate students studying the old mine systems for their research. They had permits, good equipment, and an experienced team leader named Dr. Marcus Webb. The last anyone heard from them was 2 days ago. They were supposed to report back every 12 hours. Now there was nothing but silence. I grabbed my gear and headed up to Whisper Ridge. The drive takes about an hour on good roads, but the old logging trail up to the mine entrance is rough. My truck bounced and slid on the muddy track as fog rolled down from the peaks. When I got to the mine, something felt wrong right away. It was too quiet. In 19 years of ranging, you learn to trust that feeling in your gut. The woods were silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Even the wind had stopped. The team's van was parked at the trailhead, exactly where it should be, but their gear was laid out near the mine entrance in neat rows. Too neat. It looked like someone had arranged it carefully, making perfect lines and angles. That's not how people pack when they're in a hurry or scared. I called out, but my voice just echoed off the rocks and died. The mine entrance yawned open like a black mouth. The old wooden supports were still there, rotting but holding. Warning signs and faded paint told people to stay out. I checked my equipment. Radio, nothing but static. GPS, the readings made no sense, showing impossible coordinates. Even my flashlight seemed dimmer than usual, though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning. That's when I heard the voices. Faint at first, echoing up from deep in the mine. Human voices calling for help. I recognized Dr. Webb's voice. I'd met him when he got his permits. He was shouting something about being trapped, about needing rescue. I should have waited for backup. That's protocol. But those voices sounded desperate, and I knew these mines better than anyone. I'd been in worse places and come out fine. I clicked on my headlamp and stepped into the darkness. The mine shaft sloped down at a gentle angle, just like I remembered from the old survey maps. The air was cold and still, with that mineral smell old mines have. My boots crunched on loose rock and coal dust. The voices kept calling, always seeming to come from deeper in. I followed them, marking my path with reflective tape like I always do. The main tunnel was in good shape, the supports were solid, no signs of fresh cave-ins. About a quarter-mile in, I found the first footprints in the coal dust. 5 sets, just like there should be for a 4-person team plus their guide. They headed deeper into the mine, following the main shaft. But something was odd about the return prints. They were there too, leading back toward the entrance. But they looked different, heavier somehow, and dragging slightly, like the people making them were tired or hurt. I called out again. This time I heard an answer, clear as day. Dr. Webb's voice saying, "Down here, we're trapped down here." I followed the sound deeper. The mine branched off in several directions, but the voices always seemed to come from straight ahead. The temperature was dropping as I went down. My breath started showing in little puffs of steam. My equipment was acting stranger by the minute. The radio produced nothing but static. My gas detector kept giving weird readings, like there were pockets of something in the air it couldn't identify. The electromagnetic sensor I carry for checking, mine stability, was going crazy, jumping between readings like it couldn't make up its mind. I found more evidence of the geology team as I went deeper. A notebook with Dr. Webb's handwriting dropped in the tunnel, a water bottle with one of the students' names on it. But they were placed too carefully, like someone had studied them and put them down just so. That's when I saw him. A figure in the tunnel ahead, just at the edge of my light. Human-shaped, wearing the same kind of field clothes the geology team had been in. But something was wrong with the way he moved. Too smooth, too fluid, like he was floating instead of walking. "Dr. Webb?" I called out. The figure turned toward me. Even in the dim light, I could see it was him. Same face, same beard, same glasses. But his expression was blank, empty. And when he spoke, his voice had no emotion in it at all. "Ranger Crowley," he said, "we have been waiting for you." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not, "We've been waiting," like someone who needed rescue. We have been waiting like it was planned. I took a step closer, and that's when I noticed he wasn't casting a shadow. My headlamp was shining right on him, but the wall behind him was evenly lit. "Where are your students, Dr. Webb?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are they hurt?" He tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "They are learning," he said, "as we all must learn." I backed away slowly, my hand moving to my radio. Still nothing but static. My backup wouldn't be here for hours, and I was starting to think I was in over my head. That's when the other voices started. All around me in the darkness, I could hear people calling out. Not just the geology team, dozens of voices, maybe more. Men, women, children, all calling for help, all echoing from deeper in the mine. But Dr. Webb, or whatever was wearing his face, just stood there watching me with those empty eyes. "You should come deeper," he said. "There is much to learn in the deep places." I ran. I turned and ran back toward the entrance as fast as I could, my light bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls. Behind me, I could hear footsteps following, too many footsteps, like a whole crowd of people walking in perfect step. I burst out of the mine entrance, gasping and shaking. The November air felt warm compared to the cold inside. I checked my watch. I'd been underground for 3 hours, though it felt like minutes. My truck radio worked fine up here. I called for backup and told them to bring everything: cave rescue team, medical support, maybe even the state police. Something was very wrong at Whisper Ridge. While I waited, I walked around the mine entrance, looking for clues. That's when I found the wallet. It was Dr. Webb's, sitting on a flat rock about 20 feet from the mine entrance. Everything was still in it: credit cards, driver's license, family photos. But they were arranged too neatly, laid out like someone was studying what each thing was for. Backup arrived just as the sun was setting. Tommy Briggs, another ranger from the district, along with a 4-man cave rescue team from Charleston. They'd brought all the gear: ropes, oxygen, communication equipment, the works. I told them what I'd seen, trying to make it sound rational. Equipment failures underground, possible gas leaks affecting my thinking, team members showing signs of confusion or oxygen deprivation. I didn't mention the shadow or the empty voice. Not yet. Tommy looked worried. "John, we've had 3 other incidents this week. Missing persons reports at old mine sites across the region. People going underground and coming back. Different. Different how? Families say they're not acting right. Like they're there but not there, you know? Staring into space, not responding to their names right away. Doctors can't find anything wrong. But we decided to go in as a team this time. Full safety protocols, constant radio contact with the surface, backup plans for everything. If there was some kind of gas leak or structural problem in the mine, we'd find it. The mine felt even colder when we went back in. Our equipment readings were all over the place. Electromagnetic disturbances, temperature variations, air pressure changes that didn't make sense. But no dangerous gases, no immediate structural threats. We followed the main tunnel deeper than I'd gone before. The footprints were still there in the coal dust, but now there were more of them, lots more. Like a whole crowd of people had walked through recently. About half a mile in, we found the geology team's equipment, all of it, laid out in careful rows, just like at the entrance. Cameras, rock samples, notebooks, measuring tools. Everything they'd brought down was there. But no people. The rescue team spread out to search the side tunnels while Tommy and I examined the equipment. The cameras were empty, no film, no memory cards. The notebooks had pages torn out. Whatever the team had discovered down here, someone didn't want us to see it. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from one of the side tunnels, high-pitched and terrified. Human voices calling for help. The rescue team rushed toward the sound, leaving Tommy and me with the equipment. "Wait!" I called after them. "Something's not right." But they were already gone, their lights disappearing into the darkness. Tommy and I waited, listening to our radios. For a few minutes, we could hear the rescue team talking, reporting what they saw. Then the voices changed. Subtle at first, same words, same people, but something flat about the way they spoke, like they were reading from a script instead of talking naturally. "Team leader to base," came the voice of Captain Morrison, the rescue team chief. "We have located the missing persons. All are alive and well. Returning to surface now." Tommy looked at me. That didn't sound like Morrison. "No," I said. It didn't. We waited another hour, but the rescue team never came back to the main tunnel. Our radios picked up their voices occasionally, always saying the same things. "All well. Returning soon. No problems here." But the voices kept getting flatter, more mechanical. When we finally heard footsteps coming back, I grabbed Tommy's arm. "We need to leave. Now." But the team, that's not the team. The footsteps were too regular, too synchronized. Like people marching instead of walking. And there were too many of them. Way more than the 4 men who'd gone into the side tunnel. We backed toward the entrance, keeping our lights aimed down the tunnel. The footsteps got closer, echoing off the walls in perfect rhythm. Then we saw them. The rescue team was there, all 4 men walking in a line. But behind them were others. Dr. Webb and his students, people I didn't recognize. Dozens of figures in the darkness, all walking the same way, all with the same blank expressions. Captain Morrison looked right at me with empty eyes. "Ranger Crowley, you should join us. There is much to learn." Same words Dr. Webb had used. Same flat, emotionless tone. Tommy was backing up faster now, stumbling over loose rocks. "What the hell is that?" "Move," I shouted. We ran for the entrance as the footsteps behind us got louder and faster. I could hear them gaining ground, but I didn't look back. When we burst out of the mine, I kept running until we reached the trucks. Tommy was white as a sheet, breathing hard. "John, what was that?" Those were our people. But they weren't. They weren't right. I was trying to figure out what to do next when my radio crackled to life. Captain Morrison's voice, clear as day. "Base, this is Morrison. False alarm on the rescue. Everyone's fine down here. We'll be up in until..." But I was looking right at the mine entrance. Nobody had come out. "Tommy," I said slowly, "how long does it take to get from here to town?" "About an hour and a half." "Why?" "Because I think whatever's down there is sending copies of people to the surface. And if I'm right, we need to warn everyone before it's too late." We drove straight to the sheriff's office in town, our minds racing with what we'd seen. But when we got there, Captain Morrison was already waiting for us. He looked exactly right, same uniform, same scars on his hands from years of rescue work, same way of standing with his weight on his left foot. But when he spoke, There was something missing. "Ranger Crowley," he said without any emotion, "there has been a misunderstanding. The geology team was found safe. They had simply lost track of time in their research." "Where are they now?" I asked. "They have returned to the university. All is well." I looked into his eyes and saw nothing there. No recognition, no personality, just empty space where a person should be. Tommy was catching on too. "Captain, what did you find in the side tunnel?" Morrison turned to him with that same blank stare. "We found what we were meant to find." That's when I noticed he wasn't breathing. His chest never moved up and down. No vapor came from his mouth in the cold air. I grabbed Tommy's arm and we backed toward the door. Morrison didn't try to stop us, just watched with those empty eyes. As we reached the parking lot, I saw other people around town walking the same way. Too straight, too purposeful, like they were all following the same silent instructions. "My God," Tommy whispered. "How many of them are there?" We drove to my cabin on the edge of town and started making calls. Every number we tried gave us the same response. Calm voices saying everything was fine, nothing to worry about. But the voices all had that same flat quality. I dug out my Helpost, old mining safety equipment, and started putting together a theory. The electromagnetic disturbances in the mine, the temperature changes, the way our equipment had malfunctioned, it all pointed to something that could interfere with electrical systems. "Whatever's down there," I told Tommy, "it's studying people, learning how to copy them perfectly, but it's not quite getting it right. How do we stop it?" That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me years ago. About the Cherokee stories. About the empty ones underground. He'd said they were vulnerable to what he called the storm power, electricity, lightning, the force that drove spirits from their hiding places. I still had the old mine safety equipment in my truck, including an emergency electromagnetic pulse device designed to shut down electrical systems in case of gas explosions. If whatever was in the mine was using some kind of electromagnetic field to control its copies, maybe I could disrupt it. But I'd have to go back underground to do it. "This is crazy," Tommy said. "We should call the state police, the FBI, somebody." "And tell them what? That monsters are making copies of people? They'll think we're crazy. Besides, how do we know they haven't been copied too?" As if on cue, there was a knock at my door. I looked through the window and saw my daughter Rebecca standing on the porch. "She'd driven up from Charlotte," she said. "Just wanted to visit, to work things out between us." But Rebecca hadn't talked to me in over a year, and she was standing too straight, breathing too evenly. When she spoke, asking to come in, her voice had that same flat quality I was learning to recognize. "Dad, can we talk? I want to make things right between us." I looked at Tommy and saw the recognition in his eyes. Even my own daughter had been replaced. That's when I knew I had to go back into the mine. Whatever was down there was spreading, taking over the people I cared about. If I didn't stop it now, it would keep copying people until nobody real was left. I gathered my equipment while Tommy kept watch. The EMP device was heavy and old, but it still worked. I also packed flares, extra batteries, and my grandfather's old Cherokee medicine pouch. Maybe folklore would be more useful than science in this case. "You're not going alone," Tommy said. "Yes, I am. If something happens to me, you're the only one who knows the truth. Someone has to warn people." Before he could argue, I was out the door and driving back toward Whisper Ridge. In my rearview mirror, I could see my daughter, or the thing wearing her face, standing in the driveway watching me go. The mine entrance looked the same as before, but now I could feel something waiting in the darkness. Something that had been studying me, learning from me, getting ready to replace me just like it had the others. I clicked on my headlamp and stepped into the black mouth of the mountain one last time. The voices started immediately. Dozens of people calling my name, begging for help, but I knew now they weren't really people. They were bait, lures to draw me deeper into whatever trap was waiting. I followed the main tunnel down, past where we'd found the equipment, past the side tunnels where the rescue team had disappeared. The air got colder and colder, until I could see my breath in thick clouds. Deep in the mine, maybe a mile underground, I found them. The real people, Dr. Webb, his students, the rescue team, dozens of others going back years. They were sitting in perfect rows in a huge chamber, their eyes closed, looking like they were sleeping. But they were breathing, alive. Around them, things that looked like people moved in the darkness. studying them, touching them, learning everything about how to be human. The things had no shadows and made no sound when they walked. At the center of it all was something I can't really describe. It looked like a person sometimes, but kept shifting and changing. Old mining equipment was scattered around it, metal twisted into strange shapes that hurt to look at. It spoke without moving its mouth, and I heard the voice inside my head. "Jonathan Crowley, you have come to join the learning." "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They are not harmed. They teach us what it means to be human. Soon we will understand completely." "What are you?" "We are the deep dwellers. We have been here since before your people came to the mountains. We have watched. Now we wish to walk among you." I could see the copies now, dozens of them standing around the chamber like an army waiting for orders. Perfect replicas of everyone who'd ever been taken, ready to go out into the world and replace the real people. "Why?" I asked. "Because the deep places are lonely, and humans are. Interesting." I pulled out the EMP device, my hands shaking. "Let them go, or I'll destroy your whole operation." The thing that might have been a person tilted its head. "You would die as well." "Maybe. But at least they'd be free." I activated the device. The electromagnetic pulse tore through the chamber like lightning. The copies screamed, the first real emotion I'd heard from any of them, and collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. The thing at the center writhed and twisted, losing its human shape entirely. The real people started waking up, confused and terrified. I helped them to their feet, shouting for everyone to follow me toward the entrance. Dr. Webb was weak but could walk. The rescue team recovered quickly and helped carry those who couldn't. Behind us, the mine was collapsing. The EMP had disrupted whatever force was holding the old structure together. Rocks fell like rain as we ran through the tunnels, my headlamp cutting through clouds of dust and debris. We made it out just as the Cudus main shaft caved in completely. The entrance sealed itself with a roar of falling stone, trapping whatever was left of the thing underground. The people who'd been taken were mostly okay physically, but they remembered everything. Dr. Webb told me the entity had been studying humans for decades, maybe longer. Every few years, it would take a few people to learn from, but lately it had gotten hungry for more. It wanted to replace everyone, he said. Start with small towns, then bigger cities. Eventually, there wouldn't be any real humans left. The government people arrived within hours, men in suits who asked a lot of questions and gave very few answers. They classified the whole incident as a mining accident and relocated all the affected families under something they called environmental safety concerns. The official story was that toxic gases in the old mine had caused hallucinations and memory problems. Anyone who talked about the real events was quietly discredited or transferred far away. But I know what really happened. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder about the people who came back different in other parts of the country. The missing persons reports from old mining areas. The families who say their loved ones aren't quite right anymore. My daughter Rebecca called me last week. The real Rebecca, asking why I'd been so cold to her when she visited. But she hasn't visited me in over a year. So either something went wrong with my plan, or there are more of those things out there than I thought. I still work the mountains, but I carry different equipment now. An electromagnetic detector that never leaves my belt, Cherokee sage from my grandfather's medicine pouch, and a warning for anyone who'll listen. If someone you know goes missing in old mining country and comes back different, if they stand too straight, talk too flat, or don't cast proper shadows, maybe they didn't really come back at all. The Bull Mountains keep their secrets, but sometimes those secrets don't want to stay buried. And in the deep places beneath Whisper Ridge, I sometimes wonder if something is still learning, still watching, still waiting for another chance to walk among us. My name is Margaret Sutton, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a ranger with the Virginia Department of Forestry for 14 years now, and I need to tell you what happened up on Bone Mountain before I lose my nerve to speak about it. I'm 39 years old, and I have a PhD in anthropology with a focus on Appalachian culture. My grandmother was Cherokee, my grandfather Scottish, and I grew up hearing stories about both sides of my family. The Cherokee stories always fascinated me more. tales of spirits in the mountains, of bones that sang in the wind, of places where the dead don't rest easy. But I'm a scientist. I study these stories professionally, cataloging them as part of our cultural heritage. I never believed the old tales about Bone Mountain were anything more than wind through limestone caves creating musical sounds. I had a rational explanation for everything. That was before October 1993. Bone Mountain sits in the George Washington National Forest, about 18 miles from my ranger station. It's 3,847 feet high and full of limestone caves that honeycomb the whole mountain like Swiss cheese. The Cherokee called it the place where bones sing, and they considered it sacred ground. There's a burial site up there that dates back to the 1400s. 600 years of the dead resting in those caves. The mountain got its English name from early settlers who heard strange music coming from the caves on quiet nights. They said it sounded like bones singing. Most folks figured it was just wind, but the Cherokee families I've talked to over the years always get quiet when you mention that place. They say some graves should never be disturbed. I should have listened to them. It was a beautiful October morning when I got the call. Peak autumn in the Shenandoah Valley. Trade. The kind of day that makes you understand why people move to Virginia. The leaves were every shade of red and gold you can imagine, and the air was crisp enough to make you feel alive just breathing it. The call came from our dispatch. Someone had reported illegal digging up on Bone Mountain. Artifact hunters, probably. It happens more than you'd think. People sneak into protected areas looking for Native American pottery or tools they can sell. It makes my blood boil every time. As the ranger specializing in archaeological site protection, it was my job to hike up there, document any damage, and file federal charges if necessary. Disturbing a Native American burial ground is a serious crime. It carries heavy fines and prison time. I packed my usual gear, camera, GPS unit, evidence bags, measuring tape, and my citation book. I also brought my climbing equipment because some of those caves require rappelling to reach. The burial site was about a 3-hour hike from the nearest access road, in a section of wilderness where cell phones don't work. I'd made this hike dozens of times over the years, checking on the site, documenting its condition for our cultural resource reports. It was one of my favorite places in the forest, peaceful and beautiful, with a sense of deep history that always made me feel connected to something larger than myself. The trail winds through old-growth forest, past streams that run clear and cold even in summer. You climb steadily for the first 2 hours, then the path gets steep and rocky as you approach the summit area where the burial caves are located. About halfway up, I noticed the first strange thing. The forest was too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even my footsteps seemed muffled, like the mountain was holding its breath. I figured it was just the weather. October can be unpredictable in the mountains. Sometimes pressure systems move through and make everything feel heavy and still. But as I got closer to the burial site, the silence got deeper, more complete. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. The hair on my arms started standing up, though there wasn't any wind. I've spent my whole career in these mountains. I know every sound, every smell, every feeling these woods can produce. This wasn't natural. When I finally reached the burial ground, I saw immediately that my worst fears were confirmed. Someone had been digging. Fresh dirt was scattered around the entrance to the main burial cave, and I could see where shovels had scraped against the limestone. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong with the scene. The dirt wasn't scattered randomly like you'd expect from hasty digging. It was arranged in patterns, spirals that seemed to radiate out from the cave mouth like ripples in water. And there were bones visible in the disturbed earth. Not scattered carelessly, like grave robbers would leave them, but arranged deliberately, placed with care into those same spiral patterns. Artifact hunters don't do that. They grab what they want and run. They don't stop to arrange human remains into geometric designs. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the scene and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. Even the wind had stopped moving through the trees. That's when I heard the first note. It was just one tone at first, low and haunting, like someone blowing across the mouth of a bottle. It seemed to come from inside the burial cave, echoing off the limestone walls and drifting out into the forest. I froze, listening hard. The sound lasted about 10 seconds, then faded away. I waited, but it didn't come back. Wind through the caves, I told myself. That's all it was. The mountain was famous for it. But I'd heard wind through these caves before, many times. This was different, cleaner somehow, more musical. I shook off the feeling and got to work documenting the scene. I pulled out my camera and started taking photos of the disturbed earth and the bone arrangements. But when I different too, he looked at the pictures on the camera's small screen. They were all black, just solid black rectangles, like I'd been photographing with the lens cap on. I checked the camera settings, made sure the flash was working, tried again. Same result, black photos. That was odd. But digital cameras can be finicky. I switched to my backup film camera and kept working. I measured the spiral patterns and sketched them in my notebook. They were remarkably precise, perfect mathematical curves that would have taken significant time and skill to create. Each spiral was exactly the same distance from the others, like they'd been laid out with surveying equipment. While I worked, I started to notice other strange details. The bones weren't just old Native American remains from the burial site. Some of them looked much more recent, whiter, less weathered, and they had markings on them, not natural wear patterns, but deliberate carvings. Symbols that looked almost like writing, etched into the bone with something sharp. I'd never seen anything like it in 14 years of archaeological work. I was photographing one of the carved bones with my film camera when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, expecting to see the artifact hunters who'd caused all this damage. Instead, I saw a park visitor, a middle-aged man in hiking gear, walking up the trail toward the burial site. "Excuse me," I called out, standing up and showing my ranger badge. "This area is closed for investigation. You'll need to turn around and head back down the mountain." The man didn't respond. He just kept walking toward me, his pace steady and mechanical. His hiking boots crunched on the fallen leaves with each step. Crunch, crunch, crunch. "Sir, I need you to stop right there," I said more firmly. "This is a federal crime scene." He was close enough now that I could see his face clearly. His eyes were open, but they looked empty, glassy, like he was sleepwalking. Crunch, crunch, crunch. "Sir." He walked right past me like I wasn't there, and headed straight for the burial cave. I followed him, calling for him to stop, but he didn't seem to hear me at all. At the cave entrance, he simply sat down in the dirt among the spiral bone patterns. Then he started digging with his bare hands, scooping up earth and bone fragments and arranging them in new spiral designs. I grabbed his shoulder to get his attention. His skin was ice cold, even through his jacket. "Sir, what are you doing? Are you all right?" He turned to look at me then, and I saw that his eyes weren't just glassy. They were completely white. No iris, no pupil. Just blank white orbs staring through me like I wasn't there. I jerked my hand back and stumbled away from him. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The man went back to his digging as if nothing had happened. His movements were precise and mechanical, placing each bone fragment in exactly the right spot to continue the spiral pattern. That's when the music started again. This time it wasn't just one note. It was a harmony, multiple tones weaving together in a melody that was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The sound came from inside the burial cave, but it was much louder now, much more complex. The wide-eyed man stopped digging and tilted his head, listening to the music. Then he smiled. A wide, empty grin that showed too many teeth. I backed away from the cave, my hands shaking as I reached for my radio. But when I keyed the mic, all I got was static. The radio was completely dead. The music got louder. More voices joined the harmony, if you could call them voices. They sounded human, but wrong somehow, like people trying to sing with mouths full of dirt. The white-eyed man stood up and walked into the burial cave, following the music deeper into the mountain. I watched his flashlight beam disappear around a bend in the tunnel. I should have left right then. I should have hiked back down the mountain and called for backup. But I couldn't just abandon someone who was clearly in medical distress, even if his behavior was bizarre. I pulled out my own flashlight and followed him into the cave. The burial chamber was larger than I remembered, a natural room in the limestone about 30 feet across. Ancient Cherokee remains rested in stone alcoves around the walls, where they'd been placed centuries ago with ceremony and respect. But now the chamber floor was covered with fresh spiral patterns made of bones, hundreds of them, arranged in perfect mathematical precision. Some were clearly ancient Cherokee remains from the burial site, but others were much newer. The white-eyed man stood in the center of the patterns, swaying slightly as the bone music echoed off the cave walls. The sound was coming from the bones themselves. I could see them vibrating slightly as the tones poured out of them. "Sir," I whispered, "we need to get you medical attention." He turned toward me again, that empty smile still stretching across his face. When he spoke, his voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from deep underground. "The bone singer calls," he said. "The old songs must be finished." Then he collapsed. I rushed over to check his pulse, but his skin was cold as stone. No heartbeat, no breathing. He was dead, but he'd been walking and talking just moments before. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the cave walls. That's when I saw them, dozens of other people scattered throughout the chamber, all sitting among the bone spirals, all with the same white, empty eyes, all completely still and cold as corpses. The bone music swelled louder, and I realized with growing horror that the melody was coming from them too, from their open mouths, from their throats and chest cavities, from the hollow spaces where their souls used to be. They were all dead, but somehow they were still singing. I ran from that cave like the devil himself was chasing me. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I stumbled through the tunnel, scraping my shoulders against the limestone walls in my panic to get out. Behind me, the bone music followed, a chorus of dead voices singing wordless melodies that seemed to pull at something deep inside my chest. Part of me wanted to stop running and listen. Part of me wanted to turn around and join them. That scared me more than anything else. I burst out of the cave entrance into daylight that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness underground. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. I needed to get off this mountain. I needed to call for help. But my radio was still dead, and it was a 3-hour hike to the nearest road. I started down the trail as fast as I could manage without falling. The silence in the forest felt different now. Not peaceful, but waiting. Like the whole mountain was holding its breath to see what I would do. About a mile down the trail, I found the first body. It was a woman in her 30s, wearing expensive hiking gear and carrying a professional metal detector. One of the artifact hunters, probably. She was sitting against a large oak tree, her metal detector still clutched in her hands. Her eyes were wide open and completely white. I approached carefully, already knowing what I would find. Her skin was ice cold, no pulse, no breathing. Dead, but sitting upright like she'd just decided to take a rest. The metal detector in her hands was still turned on, sweeping slowly back and forth across the ground in front of her. Its speaker was producing a steady tone that matched one of the notes I'd heard in the bone music. Beep, beep, beep. I reached out to turn it off, but the moment my fingers touched the device, images flooded my mind. Visions that weren't my own. I saw the woman digging in the burial cave earlier that morning, her metal detector leading her to ancient artifacts buried with the Cherokee dead. I saw her excitement as she pulled pottery fragments and carved bone tools from the earth. Then I saw something else rising from the disturbed grave, a figure made of shadow and bone dust, with eyes like burning coals. It sang to her in a voice like wind through dead leaves, and she couldn't help but listen. She dropped her artifacts and started digging deeper, following the bone singer's guidance. She arranged the disturbed remains in spiral patterns, just like the white-eyed man had done. With each bone she moved, the bone singer grew more solid, more real, and with each note of his song, she grew more empty inside. I jerked my hand away from the metal detector, breaking the vision. The woman's body slumped forward, finally looking as dead as it really was. I kept moving down the trail, but I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel something following me through the forest, something that moved without making sound, that watched without being seen. Every few hundred yards, I found another body, all artifact hunters, based on their equipment, all sitting or standing in natural poses, like they'd just stopped to admire the view, all with those horrible white, empty eyes. Their equipment was still running, metal detectors sweeping, cameras clicking, GPS units beeping. Each device produced tones that harmonized with the bone music, drifting down from the mountain peak. The bone singer was using their machines to amplify his song, spreading it farther into the forest. As I passed each body, I caught fragments of their final moments. The same pattern every time, drawn to the burial cave by stories of valuable artifacts, then seduced by the bone singer's music into becoming part of his collection. He fed on their souls, using their empty bodies as instruments in his ancient song. But why? What was he trying to accomplish? I got my answer when I reached the old Cherokee cemetery at the base of the mountain. The traditional burial ground had been there for centuries, hidden in a grove of ancient oaks that the Cherokee families still visited to honor their ancestors. I'd helped maintain it over the years, working with tribal elders to preserve the headstones and protect the site from vandalism. Now, every grave was open. Fresh earth was scattered between the tombstones, and the carefully maintained grass was torn up in long furrows where something had been dragged across the ground. But there were no bones in the open graves. They were all empty. The bone singer hadn't just been using the artifact hunters to disturb the burial cave. He'd been using them to harvest bones from every Cherokee grave on the mountain, gathering materials for some larger purpose. I walked through the destroyed cemetery in a daze, trying to count how many graves had been opened. Dozens, maybe 100 or more. That's when I saw Thomas Crow Feather. Thomas was an elder from the Cherokee community, a man I'd worked with many times over the years to protect burial sites throughout the forest. He was in his 70s, with silver hair and gentle eyes that always seemed to see more than he let on. Now he sat on a stone bench in the center of the cemetery, his back straight and his hands folded in his lap. He looked peaceful, like he was just enjoying the autumn afternoon, but his eyes were white as bone. "Thomas," I whispered, approaching slowly. "Thomas, can you hear me?" He turned his head toward me and smiled, the same too-wide grin I'd seen on the white-eyed man in the cave. "Maggie," he said in a voice that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "The bone singer remembers you. Your grandmother's grandmother helped bury him here, long ago." My blood turned to ice. My great-great-grandmother had been Cherokee, but I'd never known much about her life. Family stories, from that far back, were mostly lost. "He's been waiting," Thomas continued, "waiting for someone with the blood to understand, to help him finish what was started." "Finish what?" "The song of binding, the music that holds the mountain together. Your ancestors knew the old ways, knew how to use bone and blood and spirit to protect sacred places." Thomas stood up, his movements stiff and unnatural. "But they made a mistake. They bound him here to guard the mountain, but they never taught him how to rest, how to stop singing. He's been trapped for 600 years, Maggie. Trapped in the song." "That's not true," I said, backing away. "The stories say he was buried alive for practicing forbidden magic, for binding souls to bones." Thomas laughed, and the sound was like pebbles falling into a deep well. "Stories change over time. Truth gets lost. Your ancestor was the greatest bone singer who ever lived. But power without wisdom is dangerous." He gestured toward the open graves around us. He tried to protect these burial grounds by binding his spirit to them. But binding songs are tricky things. Once started, they're hard to stop. He's been growing stronger for centuries, pulling in every soul that disturbs the mountain's rest. "Then why are you helping him?" I demanded. "Because someone has to finish the song," Thomas said. "Someone with Cherokee blood and the knowledge to do it right. Someone who can set him free." Behind him, the other dead were emerging from the forest. Dozens of white-eyed corpses walking in perfect formation, converging on the cemetery from all directions. They were all humming the same melody, the bone song that had been playing in the burial cave. But now I could hear the true complexity of it, the way each voice added another layer to an ancient composition that had been building for 600 years. It was beautiful and terrible and utterly wrong. "You have a choice, Maggie," Thomas said. "Help us. Finish the song and free the bone singer to his eternal rest, or join our chorus and sing with us forever." The dead started walking toward me, their empty eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight like polished marble. I ran. I crashed through the forest like a wild animal, branches tearing at my clothes and face as I fled down the mountain. Behind me, the chorus of the dead followed at a steady, relentless pace. They didn't need to run. They knew I had nowhere to go. The bone music surrounded me now, coming from every direction. It wasn't just the corpses singing anymore. The mountain itself had joined the song. Trees creaked in rhythm, streams babbled in harmony, even the wind through the leaves carried the melody. Everything on Bone Mountain was part of the Bone Singer's composition. I needed help. I needed someone who understood what was really happening here, someone who knew the old Cherokee ways better than me. I thought of Sarah Kingfisher. Sarah was a traditional Cherokee healer who lived in a cabin about 5 miles down the mountain. She was 83 years old and one of the last people who still remembered the old stories, the real ones that hadn't been filtered through decades of retelling. If anyone could help me understand what the Bone Singer really was, it would be Sarah. I changed direction, following a deer trail that led toward her homestead. The dead voices followed me, their song growing stronger with each passing minute. Sarah's cabin sat in a small clearing beside a creek, surrounded by gardens where she grew traditional Cherokee medicines. Smoke was rising from her chimney, and I could see light in her windows. I burst through her front door without knocking, startling her as she sat by her fireplace. "Sarah, I need help," I gasped. "Something's happening on Bone Mountain. Something with the Bone Singer." She looked at me with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything, my torn clothes, my panicked expression, the way I kept glancing back toward the door. "I know," she said quietly. "I've been hearing the song getting stronger for weeks now." Someone disturbed his rest. "Artifact hunters," I said. "They opened the burial cave." "But Sarah, he's not what the stories say. Thomas Crow Feather told me he was actually trying to protect the mountain when Thomas is dead, child." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "He passed in his sleep 3 nights ago. I helped prepare his body for burial myself." The blood drained from my face. If Thomas was dead, then what had I been talking to in the cemetery? "The Bone Singer is a liar," Sarah continued. "He whispers sweet words to make people believe he's the victim, that he's trapped and needs to be freed. But that's not the truth." She stood up and moved to a wooden chest in the corner of her cabin. From inside, she pulled out an old leather journal filled with handwritten pages. "This belonged to my great-grandmother. She was there when they buried the Bone Singer alive." She wrote down the real story. Sarah opened the journal and began to read. "His name was Walks with Shadows, and he was the most powerful medicine man our people had ever known. But power corrupted him. He learned to bind human souls to bone and force them to serve his will. He could make the dead dance, make them sing, make them fight his battles." The bone music was getting closer. I could hear it through the cabin walls now, a chorus of voices approaching through the forest. When our warriors tried to stop him, he used his bone servants to fight them off. Dozens of our people died and had their souls bound to his service. Finally, our medicine women found a way to trap him. They sang a binding song of their own, one that chained his spirit to the burial cave where his victims rested. "But that means he's still trapped," I said. "He can't leave the mountain. He doesn't need to. Leave," Sarah replied. "Every soul he claims makes him stronger. Every person who dies on the mountain becomes part of his collection. He's been building an army of the dead for 600 years, waiting for someone powerful enough to help him break free of the binding. Someone with Cherokee blood," I realized. "Someone like you." The front door of the cabin exploded inward in a shower of splinters. The dead poured through the opening, artifact hunters, hikers, even Thomas Crow Feather's animated corpse, all with those horrible white eyes, all humming the bone song in perfect harmony. "Sarah, we have to run." But when I turned to look at her, Sarah was gone. In her place stood a figure made of shadow and bone dust, with eyes like burning coals and a smile full of broken teeth. The Bone Singer himself. "Did you enjoy my little performance?" he asked in a voice like grinding stone. Sarah Kingfisher has been part of my collection for quite some time, but her memories are useful. Wailang. She knows so many interesting stories. I backed against the far wall of the cabin, trapped between the Bone Singer and his army of corpses. "The binding is weakening," he continued. 600 years of patient work, gathering souls and building power. Soon I'll have enough strength to break free of this mountain prison. But I need one more thing. He gestured toward me with hands made of shadow and bone. I need a willing sacrifice. Someone who chooses to join my song rather than being forced into it. The binding requires it, one soul given freely to break the chains that hold me. "I'll never help you," I said. "Oh, but you will. Because if you don't, I'll hunt down every person you care about. Every friend, every colleague, every distant relative, with even a drop of Cherokee blood. I'll bind their souls to bone and make them sing for me forever." The dead chorus took a step closer, their white eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors. Choose quickly, Maggie. Join my song willingly, and I'll make your death swift. Refuse, and watch as I turn everyone you love into instruments for my music. That's when I remembered something from Sarah's great-grandmother's journal. Something about the medicine women who had originally trapped the bone singer. They hadn't just sung a binding song. They had sung a completion song, a melody that would end the bone singer's music permanently if it was ever finished. But it required Cherokee blood to work. And it required sacrifice. I closed my eyes and reached deep into my memory, trying to recall the Cherokee words my grandmother had taught me as a child. Sacred words I'd never fully understood. Songs for honoring the dead and helping spirits find their rest. "What are you doing?" the bone singer demanded. I began to sing. The words came slowly at first, rusty from disuse. But as I sang, I could feel the truth of them resonating in my bones, in my blood, in the sacred Cherokee heritage that connected me to this mountain. The dead chorus faltered, their harmony breaking apart as my song cut through their music like a knife. "Stop!" the bone singer roared. "You don't understand what you're doing." But I did understand. Finally, I understood everything. My song grew stronger, pulling power from the mountain itself, from the bones of my ancestors buried in these hills, from 600 years of Cherokee spirits who had been waiting for someone to finish what they started. The bone singer lunged toward me, his shadow form solidifying into claws and teeth and rage. But my song held him back, creating a barrier of pure Cherokee tradition that he couldn't cross. One by one, the dead began to collapse. As my completion song grew stronger, the bone singer's hold on their souls weakened. Their white eyes cleared, showing confusion and relief in the moments before their bodies finally found the rest they deserved. The bone singer himself began to fade, his shadow form becoming translucent. 600 years, he whispered. 600 years of waiting. Your waiting is over, I sang in Cherokee. Go to your rest. Be at peace. With a sound like wind through autumn leaves, the bone singer dissolved into nothingness. The terrible bone music stopped, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest, night birds calling, wind in the trees, the gentle murmur of the creek outside. Sarah Kingfisher's body lay peacefully by the fireplace, finally free from the bone singer's control. Around the cabin, the other corpses rested in natural positions, their souls released to whatever comes after death. I finished my song and opened my eyes. The cabin was silent, except for the crackling of the fire and my own ragged breathing. It was over. I hiked back to my ranger station that night, using my flashlight to navigate the mountain trails in darkness. The forest felt different now, alive in a natural way, no longer oppressed by the bone singer's unfinished song. When I finally got radio contact with dispatch, I reported multiple casualties on Bone Mountain and requested immediate assistance. Search and rescue teams found the bodies scattered throughout the forest and in the burial cave, just as I'd described. The official report listed the deaths as accidental exposure and hypothermia. A freak weather event, the investigators concluded. Sometimes people just get lost in the mountains and don't make it out. Nobody asked about the bone arrangements or the carved symbols. Nobody wondered why all the victims had the same peaceful expression, like they died listening to beautiful music. Some questions are better left unasked. The Cherokee burial ground was officially declared a federal monument after the incident. The entire area around Bone Mountain was closed to public access, protected by federal law and round-the-clock ranger patrols. I helped design the protection, plan myself. Sarah Kingfisher was buried according to Cherokee tradition, with ceremonies that honored her role as a keeper of the old knowledge. Her family asked me to speak at the service, and I told them how she died protecting sacred traditions from those who would abuse them. It was true, in its way. Thomas Crow Feather's body was found in his home 3 days later, exactly as Sarah had said. The coroner determined he died peacefully in his sleep, probably around the same time I was talking to his animated corpse in the cemetery. I never told anyone about that conversation. 6 months later, I was promoted to senior ranger for cultural resource protection. My new territory covers burial sites throughout the Appalachian Mountains, places where Native American remains rest in sacred ground. I take that responsibility seriously now, more seriously than I ever did before, because I've learned that some stories are more than just folklore. Some songs are more than just music. and some places hold memories that go deeper than any textbook can explain. I still hear the bone music sometimes, late at night when I'm alone on the mountain. Not the bone singer's corrupted version, but the original melody, the completion song my Cherokee ancestors sang to protect their sacred places. It reminds me that my job isn't just about enforcing federal regulations or filing incident reports. It's about standing guard between the living and the dead, making sure that some doors stay closed and some songs never get finished. Last week, I got a call about strange sounds coming from another burial site 200 miles north in West Virginia. Hikers reported hearing music in the caves, beautiful melodies that seemed to call to them through the limestone. I'm heading up there tomorrow morning, because some responsibilities pass down through blood and bone and sacred tradition. And once you've heard the real song of the mountains, you can never stop listening for the places where it might start playing again. The Cherokee called it the place where bones sing. Now, I understand why some places earned names like that, and I understand why someone needs to keep listening to make sure the songs being sung are the right ones. My name is Margaret Sutton, and I'm a guardian of sacred places. This is what I know about the singing bones of Bone Mountain. Asterisk, end asterisk. My name is Sam Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. What I'm about to tell you happened during the worst winter Kentucky had seen in 50 years. Some folks might not believe it, but I'm telling you the truth. I work for Kentucky State Parks in the Daniel Boone National Forest. My job is teaching people how to survive in the wilderness and helping when things go wrong in the backcountry. I'm good at what I do because I learned the hard way. Spent 3 tours with Special Forces as a medic, mostly in places where it got so cold your spit would freeze before it hit the ground. When I came back from the service, the mountains were the only place that felt right. Too many bad memories from the war, too many nights I couldn't sleep. The forest doesn't judge you. It just is what it is. So I got my ranger job and built myself a cabin up on Devil's Backbone Ridge, about 30 miles from the nearest road. Devil's Backbone is exactly what it sounds like. A narrow ridge that runs along the mountain spine at about 2,100 feet. The old Cherokee called it something else, but the settlers named it for how sharp and mean it looks cutting through the sky. My grandfather on my mother's side was Cherokee, and he used to tell me stories about things that lived in these mountains. Wendigo stories, mostly. I never put much stock in them. Figured they were just old tales to explain why people went crazy from cabin fever during the long winters. January of 1989 was different, though. The cold came early and stayed late. By the middle of the month, we had 3 feet of snow and temperatures hitting 15 below zero. That's not normal for Kentucky, not even up in the mountains. The Weather Service kept saying a big storm was coming, the kind that could shut down everything for weeks. I was getting ready for it. Had my supplies stocked, my generator checked, my radio equipment tested. When you live alone in the mountains, winter preparation isn't just smart. It's what keeps you alive. I'd been through enough bad weather to know the signs. The way the birds go quiet, how the air smells different, sharp and clean, like it's cutting your nose. The way sound travels funny, like the whole world is holding its breath. But this felt different from the start, wronger somehow. Even my dog Rex, a tough old German shepherd who'd been with me for 8 years, was acting strange. He'd sit by the window, whining at nothing I could see. Wouldn't go outside unless I made him, and even then, he'd do his business quick and come running back. 3 days before it really hit, I got a radio call from a family named the Washingtons. They'd rented a cabin about 5 miles north of me, up near the old mining area. Nice folks from Louisville, parents and 3 kids between 8 and 15. They'd come up for a winter camping experience, the kind of thing city people do because they think it'll be fun until they realize how serious the mountains can get. "Ranger Ironwood," the father said over the radio. His voice was tight, worried. "We're having some trouble up here." "What kind of trouble, Mr. Washington?" "Something's been watching our cabin. Last 2 nights, my wife saw a figure standing in the trees. Big. Really big. And when I went out to check this morning, there were tracks in the snow, but they don't look like anything I've ever seen." I told him I'd snowshoe up to check on them once the current storm passed. Figured it was probably a black bear looking for easy food, or maybe their nerves getting the better of them. City folks weren't used to how quiet and dark the mountains get in winter. Your mind starts playing tricks on you. "We'll be fine until then," he said. "Thanks, Ranger." That was the last time anyone heard from the Washington family. The storm hit that night like God was throwing a tantrum. Wind howling so loud I couldn't hear myself think. Snow coming down so thick I couldn't see my own hand when I held it out the window. The temperature dropped to 20 below, then kept falling. My cabin shook like it might come apart, and twice I had to go outside to clear snow from my generator exhaust so it wouldn't carbon monoxide me in my sleep. By morning, everything was buried. 3 more feet of snow on top of what we already had. The silence when the wind stopped was the kind that makes your ears ring. No birds, no small animals moving around. Nothing but the creak of tree branches heavy with ice. I tried the radio, static. The storm had knocked out the repeater tower, which meant I was on my own until the weather cleared and repair crews could get up the mountain. That might be days, or it might be weeks. But I kept thinking about the Washington family. They had kids up there. If something was wrong, really wrong, those kids could die waiting for help that wasn't coming. So I did what any ranger worth his salt would do. I got my gear together and headed out into the worst blizzard Kentucky had seen in half a century. I should have trusted my grandfather's stories. Getting to the Washington cabin took me 4 hours through snow that should have been a 2-hour snowshoe trip. The storm wasn't done yet. Wind kept kicking up and throwing snow in my face so hard I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I knew these trails like my own backyard. Even in whiteout conditions, I could follow the ridge line by feel. The cold was the worst part. My breath froze on my face mask within minutes. Even with my best winter gear, the kind they issue to special forces, I could feel the temperature trying to get at me. My fingers went numb inside my gloves. My feet started that dangerous tingle that means frostbite isn't far away. But something else was bothering me more than the cold. I'd been walking these mountains for over 20 years, and I knew what they sounded like. Even in a storm, there should be some sign of life. A squirrel moving through the trees, an owl calling, something. But there was nothing except the wind and my own breathing. Rex had tried to follow me, but I'd locked him in the cabin. He'd gone crazy when I started getting ready to leave, barking and scratching at the door like he knew something I didn't. Smart dog. I wish I'd listened to him. The Washington cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by thick hardwood forest. It was one of those rental places that looks nice in the summer, but wasn't really built for serious winter weather. As I got closer, I could see something was wrong. The front door was gone. Not just open, gone. Torn clean off its hinges and lying in the snow about 10 feet away. The opening gaped black against the white wood of the cabin walls. Snow had blown inside and piled up in drifts across the floor. I called out, "Hello, Mr. Washington. Anyone there?" My voice sounded small and flat in the cold air. No answer. I approached carefully, my hand on the bear spray clipped to my belt. Bears were about the only thing I could think of that might tear a door off like that, but it was the wrong time of year. Bears should be deep in their dens by now, not wandering around in blizzards. The inside of the cabin made my stomach turn. Furniture was scattered everywhere, but not randomly. It was arranged in a pattern I couldn't make sense of. Chairs stacked in the corners, the table flipped upside down in the center of the room. Couch cushions lined up by the windows, like someone was building a fort. But the family's supplies were untouched, food still in the cabinets, suitcases still packed and sitting by the beds. If it was a robbery, nothing had been taken. If it was a bear, the food would be gone. The most disturbing thing was the silence inside the cabin. My footsteps echoed wrong, like the sound was being absorbed by something I couldn't see. Even the wind outside seemed muffled, as if the cabin was wrapped in invisible cotton. I found the first sign of the family in the back bedroom. Dark stains on the wooden floor that looked like dried blood. Not a lot, just a few drops leading from the bed to the window. The window was open, screen torn out from the inside. In the snow below, I could see where something had landed hard and then moved away into the trees. That's when I found the tracks. They started right under the bedroom window and headed northeast toward the deep forest. At first glance, they looked almost human, 2 feet, walking upright. But everything about them was wrong. They were 16 inches long and narrow, with what looked like 4 long toes ending in sharp points. The stride was 7 feet between prints. No human being could walk like that. especially not in snow this deep. The tracks didn't sink into the snow the way they should have. Even my snowshoes, designed to spread my weight, left deeper impressions. Whatever made these tracks was either impossibly light or the snow was acting strange around it. I followed the trail for about 100 yards, my heart pounding harder with each step. The tracks led uphill toward an area I knew well. Old mining country from the 1800s. Lots of abandoned shafts and cave openings. Dangerous in good weather, deadly in a storm like this. The trail stopped at the edge of a steep drop-off. Just stopped, like whatever I was following had sprouted wings and flown away. But at the bottom of the ravine, maybe 30 feet down, I could see something that made my blood freeze. Scraps of brightly colored fabric caught on the tree branches. The same colors I'd seen in the cabin, a red coat, blue jeans, a yellow scarf. But they were torn to shreds and scattered across the trees like Christmas decorations hung by a madman. Some of them were hanging 12 feet off the ground. I got on my radio, even though I knew it was probably useless. "This is Ranger Ironwood calling any station. I have a missing family and need immediate assistance." Static. Repeat, "This is Sam Ironwood with a possible fatality situation on Devil's Backbone Ridge." More static than something that might have been voices, but they sounded like they were talking backwards. That's when I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. It started low, like the wind through a cave opening, then rose into something that was almost human but not quite. Like someone trying to scream with a mouthful of snow. The sound was coming from behind me. I turned around slowly, my hand moving to the emergency flare on my belt. Bears I could handle, wolves I could handle, even crazy people lost in the woods I could handle. But this was something my training hadn't prepared me for. Standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away, was the tallest person I'd ever seen. At least 12 feet, maybe more. Thin enough that it looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. Even in the storm, I could see its eyes. Pale blue like winter ice, and bright enough to reflect light that wasn't there. It stood perfectly still, not moving even when the wind hit it. Snow blew right through it like it wasn't completely solid. And it was watching me with the kind of attention a cat gives to a mouse before it pounces. I blinked, and it was gone. Not moved. Gone. Like it had never been there at all. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear my grandfather's voice telling me about things that came out during the hungry times, when winter lasted too long and people did things they shouldn't do just to survive. I started back toward my cabin, moving as fast as the snow would let me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, staying just out of sight in the trees. Every few minutes I'd stop and look back, but there was never anything there. Just wind and snow and the kind of cold that makes you forget what warmth feels like. It took me 6 hours to get home, 6 hours of feeling eyes on my back and jumping at every sound the wind made. By the time I reached my cabin, the storm was getting worse again, and the temperature had dropped to 25 below. Rex was waiting for me at the door, whining and pressing against my legs like he was trying to push me inside. Smart dog. He knew something I was still figuring out. I should have packed up right then and headed for town, storm or no storm. Should have trusted the fear that was crawling up my spine like ice water. But I was a ranger, and rangers don't run from anything, even when they should. That was my first mistake. The second storm hit around midnight, and this one was meaner than anything I'd seen in my 22 years in these mountains. The wind was howling like something alive and angry, and the temperature kept dropping. My generator was working overtime just to keep the cabin above freezing. But the cold wasn't what kept me awake. It was the sounds. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something moving around outside, heavy footsteps in the snow, circling the cabin. Rex heard it too. He started growling low in his throat, the kind of growl he saved for things that really worried him. I got my rifle and went to the window. Couldn't see anything through the storm, but I could hear whatever it was getting closer. The footsteps were wrong though, too far apart, like something with legs longer than they should be. And they didn't crunch in the snow the way normal footsteps do. They made more of a sliding sound, like something being dragged. Then the footsteps stopped right outside my front door. I waited, holding my breath, finger on the trigger. Rex had stopped growling and was just staring at the door with his ears flat against his head. We stayed like that for maybe 10 minutes, neither of us moving. Then something scratched at the door. Long, slow, scratches like fingernails being dragged down wood. But the scratches were too high up, at least 8 feet off the ground. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The scratching stopped. Then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water. A voice, muffled by the wind and snow, but clear enough to understand. Sam. It knew my name. "Sam, let me in. So cold out here." But the voice was wrong. It sounded like someone trying to talk with their mouth full of marbles. The words were stretched out too long, and there was an echo to them, like they were coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm armed," I shouted back. "You need to identify yourself." "Sam," the voice said again. "So hungry, Sam. Let me in." That's when I noticed something that made my hands shake. The voice was coming from about 10 feet above my door. Nothing human could be talking from that high up. I looked out the window again and saw something that almost made me drop my rifle. In the swirling snow, I could make out a shape pressed against the side of my cabin. It was too tall and too thin, and its arms were hanging down below where its knees should be. Its head was tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. But the worst part was that it wasn't wearing any clothes. In 20 below weather, this thing was naked, and it didn't seem to care. "I know you're watching, Sam," it said, and now I could see its mouth moving. Too wide, with too many teeth. "Smell your fear, taste it in the air." I raised my rifle and fired 3 shots through the window. The glass exploded outward, and snow started blowing into the cabin. When I looked again, the thing was gone. But I could hear it laughing somewhere in the storm. A sound like breaking glass mixed with a baby crying. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my chair with my rifle across my knees, watching the broken window and listening to the storm. Rex wouldn't leave my side. Every now and then, I'd hear that sliding footstep sound circling the cabin, but I never saw the thing again. When morning came, the storm had passed, leaving behind 3 more feet of snow and a silence so complete it hurt my ears. I went outside to check the damage and found tracks in the snow around my cabin. The same impossible tracks I'd seen at the Washington place, only these came right up to my walls and then just stopped. But there was something new. Scratched into the wood beside my front door were symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old, like something that might have been carved by Native Americans. But wrong somehow, twisted. Looking at them made me feel sick to my stomach. I tried my radio again and got lucky. Caught a signal from the state police helicopter pilot who was doing storm damage assessment flights. "This is Ranger Ironwood on Devil's Backbone Ridge. I need immediate assistance with a missing family and a dangerous individual in the area." "Copy that, Ranger. We've got reports of 3 other families that haven't checked in since the storm hit. Flying search patterns now, but visibility is still poor." "Listen carefully," I told him. "Don't land anywhere up here. Whatever you do, don't land. This isn't a normal search and rescue." "What do you mean, Ranger?" Before I could answer, I heard something that made my throat close up. The pilot's voice changed, getting tight and scared. "Holy Mother of God. There's something big moving through the trees down there. Really big. Moving faster than anything should be able to move in this snow." Then, his radio went dead. I spent the next hour trying to raise him again, but got nothing. The silence stretched on until I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to know what had happened to that pilot, and I had to find those other families. Even if it meant going back out into country where something impossible was hunting people. I loaded my pack with emergency supplies, extra, ammunition, and every flare I had. If this thing didn't like light, maybe fire would keep it away. I left Rex in the cabin with enough food and water for a week. He whined and scratched at the door when I left, but I couldn't risk him getting hurt. The forest felt different in the daylight after the storm. Too quiet, like something had killed every living thing for miles around. My snowshoes were the only sound, and even that seemed too loud. I kept stopping to listen, but all I heard was my own heartbeat. I found the helicopter about 2 miles from my cabin, crashed in a small clearing. The pilot was still strapped in his seat, but something had torn the cockpit open like it was made of paper. The pilot's body was arranged in the snow in front of the wreckage, arms and legs spread out like he was making a snow angel. But his face was gone, eaten away down to the bone, and around his body, carved into the snow, were more of those twisted symbols. That's when I heard voices coming from deeper in the forest. Human voices, calling for help. I followed the sound and found them, a family of 4 huddled in a makeshift shelter they'd built between 2 fallen trees. The Hendersons from Cincinnati, according to their identification. They'd been missing for 3 days. "Thank God," the father said when he saw me. "We've been trapped here since our cabin was attacked. Something killed the Yamadas in the cabin next to ours, tore them apart and arranged the pieces like it was playing with them." The mother was holding their 2 young kids, and all of them looked like they hadn't slept in days. "It keeps coming back," she whispered. "Every night. It talks to us, tries to get us to come out, says it's so hungry. We need to get you out of here," I told them. "Now." But as I said it, I heard that sliding footstep sound again, coming from all around us. The kids started crying, and their parents pulled them closer. "Too late," the father said, staring, and passed me into the trees. "It's here." I turned around and saw it standing maybe 30 yards away, perfectly still among the tree trunks. In daylight, it was even worse than I'd imagined. 12 feet tall and thin as a skeleton, with yellowish skin stretched tight over bones that stuck out in all the wrong places. Its arms hung down to its knees, ending in hands with fingers too long and joints that bent backward. But the worst part was its face. Human enough that you could see it had once been a person, but changed into something that should never exist. Its eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and when it looked at me, I felt like it was seeing straight through to my soul. "Hello, Sam," it said, and its voice was the sound of wind through a graveyard. "Been waiting for you." The Henderson family froze like rabbits when a hawk flies over. I could hear the kids whimpering, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the thing standing in the trees. "Take the children and run toward my cabin," I whispered to the parents. "Follow the ridgeline south. Don't look back, no matter what you hear." "We can't leave you," the father started to say. "Go now," I shouted, raising my rifle. They ran. I heard them crashing through the snow behind me, but I kept my weapon trained on the creature. It watched them go with what might have been amusement, tilting its head like a curious dog. "They won't get far," it said. "Snow's too deep, cold's too bitter. I'll find them later, when I'm done with you." "What are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It stepped closer, and I could see details I wished I couldn't. Its teeth were yellow and pointed, too many of them for its mouth. When it breathed, I could see vapor coming out, but not like normal breath in cold air. This looked thicker, darker, like smoke from a fire that was burning something rotten. "I was like you once," it said. "Had a name, had a family. That was long ago, before the hungry winter." It moved again, and now I could see it didn't quite touch the ground. Its feet hovered just above the snow, which explained why its tracks were so shallow. 1,847. It continued, like we were having a normal conversation. "Worst winter these mountains ever saw before this one. Lasted from October through May. No game to hunt, no food to find, just cold and snow and darkness." I kept backing up, but it matched my pace exactly, staying the same distance away. My family was starving, wife and 3 children, getting thinner every day. Baby stopped crying because she didn't have the strength. Wife stopped talking because talking took too much energy. But I was the father. I was supposed to provide. The temperature around us was dropping. I could feel it through my winter gear, a cold that had nothing to do with weather. Found a deer that had frozen to death. But when we cooked it, it wasn't enough. Never enough. So when my wife died in her sleep, I did what I had to do. Fed my children, fed myself. My blood turned to ice water. You're the one from the old stories, the cannibal from Devil's Backbone. The children lasted longer after that, but not long enough. When they died, I ate them too. Ate everything that had once been my family, just to survive one more day. One more week. It was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. I could smell it, like meat that had been left out in the sun for too long. But the hunger didn't stop when spring came. It got worse. Stronger. And when I finally died, it wouldn't let me rest. Bound me to this mountain, this ridge where my family starved. Now I hunt when the winters are hard, when people get trapped like I was trapped. "The families you killed," I said. "They were just trying to survive the storm. Like I was trying to survive." Its voice was getting louder, more excited. "But they were weak. Soft. City people who never knew real hunger. I gave them a gift. I showed them what hunger really means." It lunged at me then, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I fired 3 shots center mass, but the bullets went right through it like it was made of smoke. Its hands, those impossibly long fingers, wrapped around my throat and lifted me off the ground. "You're different, Sam," it whispered, its face inches from mine. I could see my reflection in its ice-blue eyes, and behind that, images of its victims. The Washington family, torn apart and devoured. The pilot, consumed alive. Dozens of others over the decades, all fed to this thing's endless hunger. You know what it means to survive. You've killed to live. I can smell the blood on you from your war. You understand. It was right. I had killed people. In Afghanistan, in Iraq. Sometimes up close, close enough to see their eyes when they died. I'd told myself it was different, that it was war, that it was necessary. But in the end, I'd still taken lives to save my own. Join me, Sam. Feed with me. The hunger is beautiful when you stop fighting it. For a moment, I almost did. The cold was numbing my brain, and the thing's voice was hypnotic. It would be so easy to give in, to let the hunger take over, to stop caring about right and wrong and just survive, no matter what it cost. But then I heard something that snapped me back to reality. In the distance, the Henderson children crying. Still alive, still running through the snow, trying to get to safety. I had one emergency flare left on my belt. With the last of my strength, I pulled the pin and shoved it into the creature's chest. The effect was immediate and terrible. The thing screamed, not with its voice, but with a sound that came from somewhere deeper than sound should come from. It dropped me and staggered backward, the flare burning through its body like it was made of paper. "Fire," I gasped, struggling to my feet. "You're afraid of fire." "It burns," it howled, trying to pull the flare out of its chest. It remembers what I was. The flare was spreading, lighting up the creature from the inside. I could see through it now, see the man it had once been. Just a scared father trying to keep his family alive during the worst winter in memory. But the hunger had changed him, twisted him into something that could never be human again. "I can't stop," it said, and for the first time, its voice sounded genuinely sad. "The hunger won't let me stop. Every winter it gets stronger. Every winter there are more people in my mountains. Then, maybe it's time to rest," I told it. The fire from the flare had spread through its entire body now. It was burning like a torch, but the flames were white and cold instead of red and hot. As it burned, the temperature around us started to rise. The snow began to melt. "Tell them," it said as it collapsed to its knees. "Tell them about the hungry winters. Tell them some hungers can never be satisfied." Then it was gone. Nothing left but a patch of melted snow and the lingering smell of something old and rotten finally being allowed to rot. I found the Henderson family half a mile away, huddled together and nearly frozen. Got them back to my cabin and warmed them up. Called for emergency evacuation as soon as my radio started working again. The official report blamed the deaths on exposure and animal attacks. Black bears, they said, though no one could explain how black bears had torn the doors off cabins or arranged bodies in geometric patterns. The area was temporarily closed for avalanche danger, which was a lie, but a useful one. The Henderson family never talked about what they saw. I think they convinced themselves it was hypothermia-induced hallucinations. People are good at that, convincing themselves that impossible things didn't really happen. But I know what I saw, and I know it's not really gone. That was 36 years ago, and I'm still a ranger on Devil's Backbone Ridge. Still alone in my cabin, though Rex passed away years ago, and I never got another dog. Some kinds of loneliness are safer than others. The winters since then have been milder, mostly. Climate change, the Weather Service says. But every few years, when the cold comes early and stays late, I start getting reports. Families going missing, hikers found arranged in patterns that don't make sense, tracks in the snow that are too big and too strange. I've learned to read the signs. When the temperature drops below 0 and stays there for more than a week, when the snow gets deeper than 3 feet, when the animals go quiet and even the wind seems to hold its breath, that's when I know it's coming back. The hungry winters make it stronger. And with more people moving to the mountains, building vacation cabins and retirement homes in places that used to be empty wilderness, there are more opportunities. More chances for families to get trapped when the storms hit. I've saved some of them. Not all. The fire trick works, but you have to be close enough to use it, and getting that close to something that was once human but isn't anymore, it changes you. Every time I look into those ice blue eyes, I see a little more of myself reflected back. Because the truth is, we're not that different. That thing, and me, we're both survivors who did whatever it took to stay alive. The only difference is that I found a way to stop. I keep special equipment now. Emergency flares rated for extreme cold. Magnesium fire starters that burn hot enough to melt steel. White phosphorus grenades I'm not supposed to have, but got from some old army contacts who don't ask questions. And I watch the weather reports like my life depends on them. Because sometimes it does. The National Weather Service is predicting another severe winter this year. Early snow, record low temperatures, multiple storm systems moving through the region. The kind of winter that traps people in the mountains and makes them desperate. The kind of winter that feeds old hungers. If you're ever planning to visit the Daniel Boone National Forest in winter, if you're thinking about renting one of those nice cabins up on the ridges, let me give you some advice. Check the weather forecast first. If they're calling for heavy snow and below zero temperatures, stay home. Find somewhere else to vacation. And if you're already up here when the storms hit, if you find yourself trapped in a cabin with your family while the wind howls outside and the temperature drops to levels that make your bones ache, remember this. Keep your doors locked, keep your fires burning, and if you hear something scratching at your walls in the middle of the night, don't go outside to investigate. Some things are better left hungry. My name is Sam Ironwood, and I'm still watching Devil's Backbone Ridge. Still waiting for the next hungry winter. Still remembering the sound of children crying in the snow, and the weight of decisions that change you forever. The mountains are beautiful in winter. Peaceful, quiet, but sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear something moving through the trees. Something big and patient and always, always hungry. And sometimes, on the coldest nights when the snow is deep and the wind is just right, you might hear it calling your name. My name is David Hawthorne, but everyone calls me Dave. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now, working in the Great Smoky Mountains along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Before this job, I was a zoologist. I spent 20 years studying animals, especially the ones that come out at night. I thought I knew everything about predators in these mountains. I was wrong. It's September 1985, and I'm stationed at Ravens Hollow, one of the deepest parts of the park. Most people never even hear about this place. It's 12 miles from the nearest trail, and the trees grow so thick that even during the day, it feels like twilight down there. The Cherokee people who lived here first called it a forbidden zone. They had good reasons. I'm 43 years old, divorced, and my twin daughters live with their mom in Nashville. I became a ranger after a big fight at the university where I worked. Some professor didn't like my research on wolf behavior, and I got pushed out. Funny thing is, that research might be the only reason I'm still alive today. Ravens Hollow sits in a valley so deep that cell phones don't work. Radio signals bounce around the mountains and come out scrambled. If something goes wrong down there, you're on your own for at least 8 hours. That's how long it takes to hike out and get help. The Cherokee elders still tell stories about this place. They talk about night wolves that walk on 2 legs like men. The old-timers say these wolves guard the valley, making sure no one takes what doesn't belong to them. I always figured these were just stories to keep people from hunting in their sacred areas. I studied every night predator in North America. Black bears, mountain lions, coyotes, the few wolves we have left. I can tell you exactly how they hunt, where they sleep, what they eat. I've tracked them with GPS collars and cameras. I've spent more nights in the woods than most people spend in their own beds. But I never believed in monsters. The weather this September has been strange. Usually, it starts cooling down by now, but the nights stay warm and sticky. Heavy fog rolls into the valleys around sunset and doesn't lift until morning. During the day, everything feels normal. Birds sing, squirrels chatter, life goes on. But when the sun goes down, something changes. It started 3 weeks ago when a young couple came hiking through. They had good gear and knew what they were doing. Sarah and Mike Chen, college kids from North Carolina. They filled out all the right forms and took the safety talk seriously. Nice kids. They came back 2 days early, running down the trail like something was chasing them. Their tent was shredded, their backpacks torn open. Sarah had scratches on her arms that looked like claw marks. Mike kept looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound. "Rangers," Mike said, his hands shaking as he tried to light a cigarette. "We saw something that doesn't make sense. I've heard a lot of wild stories from scared campers. Usually, it's a bear going through their food, or they heard an owl and thought it was a monster. But these kids were different. They were really scared, not just telling tales." "Tell me what happened," I said, getting out my notebook. Sarah looked at Mike, then back at me. "We were camped by Raven Creek, about 6 miles in. Everything was normal the first night, but yesterday evening, we heard howling. 'Coyotes,' I said. 'We have a lot of them.' "No." Mike shook his head hard. "I grew up on a farm. I know what coyotes sound like." This was different, deeper, and they were talking to each other. "Talking? Like they were making plans?" Sarah said. "One would howl, then another would answer from a different direction, then another. They had us surrounded. I wrote this down, but I wasn't worried yet. Pack animals do coordinate. It's normal behavior. Then around midnight we heard something walking. Around our tent," Mike continued. "Big steps, but not like a bear, more careful. Like it was trying to be quiet." "Did you see anything?" "That's the weird part," Sarah said. Mike unzipped the tent flap just a little to look out. There were 3 wolves standing about 20 feet away, just watching us. "Wolves are rare here, but not impossible," I said. "They were standing up," Mike said quietly. I stopped writing. "What do you mean?" "On their back legs, like people. They stood there for maybe 10 seconds looking right at us. Then they dropped down and walked away." I'd heard this kind of story before. When people are scared and it's dark, they see things that aren't there. Their minds play tricks on them. Then what happened? We stayed in the tent all night, didn't sleep at all. In the morning, everything seemed normal, so we started packing up. But when we came back from getting water at the creek, our tent was destroyed. I looked at their gear. The tent was definitely torn up, but not by claws. The cuts were too clean, too straight. It looked more like knife work. "Someone's playing pranks," I told them. "Probably local kids trying to scare campers. I'll look into it." But as they drove away, I kept thinking about what they said. Wolves standing up, howling that sounded like talking. I'd studied wolf behavior for 20 years, and I'd never seen anything like that. Still, I had a job to do. Someone was harassing campers in my section of the park, and I needed to find out who. I loaded my truck with camping gear, cameras, and my rifle. If it was teenagers playing games, I'd catch them. If it was wild animals, I'd document it properly. Either way, I'd get to the bottom of this. As I drove toward Raven's Hollow, the sun was setting behind the mountains. The fog was already starting to roll in. I set up my camp about a quarter mile from where the Chen kids had been staying. I know this area like my own backyard. Every trail, every creek, every cave. I've been coming here for 6 years, and it's always been peaceful. But that night felt different. I had 6 trail cameras with me, the good ones with night vision and motion sensors. I placed them in a circle around my camp, about 50 yards out. If anything bigger than a raccoon came near, I'd have pictures by morning. I also had my night vision scope, the kind I use for counting deer. It can spot a mouse at 100 yards in complete darkness. Whatever was out there, I'd see it coming. Around 9 o'clock, I made a fire and heated up some coffee. The normal night sounds were all there. Crickets, tree frogs, an owl hooting somewhere up the ridge. Everything seemed normal. Then, just after 10, the sounds stopped. All of them. At once. The forest went completely quiet, like someone had turned off a radio. In 20 years of fieldwork, I'd only heard this a few times, usually when a big predator was moving through. Every small animal shuts up and hides. I picked up my rifle and used the night scope to scan the tree line. Nothing moved. No heat signatures, no glowing eyes, nothing. But something was out there. I could feel it watching me. The silence lasted about 10 minutes. Then I heard the first howl. It came from the ridge above my camp, maybe 200 yards away, deep and long, like the Chen kids described. I'd heard thousands of wolf howls on recordings, but this was different. It had a strange rhythm to it, almost like a song. Another howl answered from across the valley, then another from downstream. Within a minute, I counted at least 6 different voices, all calling to each other from different directions. I grabbed my recorder and got it all on tape. In the morning, I'd compare it to known wolf vocalizations. The howling went on for about 5 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it started. The normal forest sounds came back slowly, like animals were checking to make. I'm sure it was safe. I stayed by the fire until midnight, but nothing else happened. Finally, I crawled into my sleeping bag with my rifle beside me. I must have dozed off, because I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Heavy steps, definitely not a deer or raccoon. Something big was walking around my camp, just outside the circle of firelight. The steps were slow and careful, like whatever it was didn't want to make noise. I lay still and listened. The footsteps stopped right behind my tent. I could hear breathing, deep, steady breaths like a large dog or wolf. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A sound like claws scraping against metal. Whatever was out there was examining my truck. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and slowly unzipped my tent. The fire had died down to embers, but I could see the outline of my truck about 30 feet away. Something was standing beside it. Something big. I switched on the flashlight, and for just a second, I saw it clearly. It looked like a wolf, but wrong. Too big, maybe 6 feet at the shoulder. Its front legs were longer than they should be, almost like arms. And when my light hit it, the thing turned to look at me. The eyes were what I'll never forget. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, aware, almost human. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then it dropped down onto 4 legs and disappeared into the trees faster than anything that size should be able to move. I sat there with my flashlight shaking in my hands for about 10 minutes. Then I got mad at myself. I'm a scientist. I study animals for a living. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a bear standing up to get a better smell. In the dark, with adrenaline pumping, I could have misjudged the size and shape. Bears do examine vehicles, and they can move surprisingly fast when they want to. I convinced myself that's what it was. Just a bear. But when morning came and I checked, my trail cameras, 5 of them were missing. Just gone, like they'd never been there. The 6th one was still in place, but the memory card was blank. That was impossible. Those cameras are built tough, and they're designed to be hidden. An animal couldn't remove them without leaving tracks or signs of damage. I spent the morning looking for the missing cameras and checking the area around my truck. I found paw prints in the soft dirt near where I'd seen the creature. They were wolf prints, but huge, at least 6 inches long. I photographed them and made plaster casts. But the weird thing was how they changed. Near my truck, they were normal wolf prints, all 4 paws on the ground. But about 20 feet away, something strange happened. The front paw prints got longer and more spread out, almost like handprints. The back paw prints stayed normal. It looked like the animal had stood up and walked on its hind legs. I followed the tracks for about 50 yards before they disappeared on rocky ground. But I found something else that made me question everything I thought I knew about animals. Scratched into the bark of a big oak tree, about 7 feet off the ground, were claw marks. 4 deep gouges, perfectly parallel. I measured them. Each mark was 8 inches long and cut almost an inch deep into the wood. I've seen bear claw marks on trees plenty of times. These weren't made by a bear. They were too high, too deep, and too precise. Whatever made them had been standing upright and had claws like knives. I took pictures of everything and hiked back to my truck. I needed to get this evidence back to the ranger station and figure out what was happening in Raven's Hollow. But as I packed up my gear, I kept feeling like I was being watched. Every time I looked toward the tree line, I thought I saw movement in the shadows. Nothing clear, just a sense that something was tracking my every move. On the drive out, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Twice, I thought I saw a large shape following on the road behind me, just at the edge of my headlight range. But when I stopped to look, nothing was there. By the time I reached the main road, the sun was fully up and everything seemed normal again. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But I still had the photographs, the recordings, and the plaster casts. Whatever was in Raven's Hollow, it wasn't just a bear or a regular wolf. And somehow, I knew it wasn't done with me yet. I spent 3 days at the ranger station going through my evidence. The photographs were clear. Those claw marks were real, and they were way too high and deep for any normal animal. The plaster cast showed paw prints that changed from four-legged to two-legged, which should be impossible. The howling recordings were the strangest part. I played them for every wildlife expert I could find. Nobody could identify the species. The sounds had patterns that seemed almost like language, but no known animal communicates that way. My supervisor, Jim Rodriguez, thought I was losing it. "Dave, you're talking about werewolves," he said, looking at my photos. "These could be hoax evidence. Someone's playing games with you." "Jim, I've been tracking animals for 20 years. This isn't a hoax." "Then what is it?" I didn't have an answer that made sense. While I was trying to figure things out, another incident happened. Tom Bradley, a photographer from National Geographic, had gotten permission to document night wildlife in the area. He was an experienced outdoorsman with top-level camera equipment. Tom went missing on his second night in Ravens Hollow. The search team found his camp 3 days later. His expensive cameras were smashed to pieces, scattered around the campsite like they'd been thrown by something incredibly strong. His tent was shredded the same way the Chen kids' tent had been tented. Long, clean cuts that looked deliberate. But the worst part was the blood. Not a lot, but enough to show that Tom had been hurt. We found a trail of blood drops leading away from the camp toward the deeper parts of the forest. The search dogs followed it for about 2 miles before losing the scent at a creek. We never found Tom's body. I volunteered to join the search teams, but I had an ulterior motive. I wanted to see the scene for myself and look for the same kind of tracks I'd found before. I found them, all right. The same huge wolf prints, transitioning from four-legged to two-legged movement. But this time, there were more of them. At least 4 different sets of tracks, maybe 5. Whatever was out there, it wasn't working alone. That night, I met with Joseph Crowfeather, a Cherokee elder who worked as a cultural liaison for the Park Service. I'd known Joe for years, but we'd never talked about the old stories. This time, I needed to know. "Joe, what can you tell me about Ravens Hollow?" The real story, not the tourist version. He was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee. Finally, he spoke. "My grandfather told me never to go there after dark. He said it belonged to the night wolves." Night wolves? Men who became wolves but kept their human thoughts. The story goes back hundreds of years. Warriors who broke sacred hunting laws were cursed to become guardians of the forbidden places. "Joe, I need you to be straight with me. Do you think these stories are real?" He looked at me with completely serious eyes. "Dave, my people lived in these mountains for thousands of years. We didn't make up stories about places that were safe." That conversation changed everything for me. I started researching Cherokee folklore and found references to shapeshifters in dozens of tribal histories. Always the same basic story. People who violated sacred laws and were transformed into something between human and wolf. But I still needed proof, real scientific proof. I decided to go back to Ravens Hollow, but this time I wouldn't be alone. I convinced 2 other rangers, Mike Torres and Lisa Chen, no relation to the campers, to come with me. We'd set up a base camp and do systematic documentation of whatever was happening. We went in on a Thursday afternoon with enough supplies for 3 days. The plan was simple: document everything, stay together, and get out at the first sign of real danger. The first night was quiet, too quiet. None of us slept well. The second night, they came for us. It started around midnight with the howling, but this time it was closer, and there were definitely more voices. At least 8 or 10 different animals calling to each other from all around our camp. "That's not coyotes," Mike said, checking his rifle. "It's not wolves either," Lisa added. She'd studied animal behavior in college. The howling got closer, forming a tightening circle around us. We built up the fire and stood back to back with our weapons ready. Then we saw the eyes, pairs of glowing eyes, reflecting our firelight from the darkness beyond the trees. They were too high off the ground to be normal wolves, and they moved wrong. They'd appear in one spot, disappear, then show up somewhere else seconds later. "How many do you count?" Mike whispered. 7, maybe 8, I said. Then one of them stepped into the light. It was bigger than the one I'd seen before, maybe 7 feet tall when standing upright. Its body was covered in dark fur, but its front limbs were longer and more flexible than any wolf's legs should be. When it moved, It switched between walking on 4 legs and 2 legs, like it was the most natural thing in the world. But the face was the worst part. It had a wolf's snout and ears, but the eyes were human. Intelligent, calculating, aware. It looked right at me and tilted its head, like it was trying to remember where it had seen me before. "Nobody move," I whispered. The creature studied us for maybe 30 seconds. Then it did something that made my blood go cold. It raised one front paw and pointed directly at me. Then it pointed toward the forest. The message was clear. "You, come with us." When I didn't move, it threw back its head and howled. The sound was different this time, angry, commanding. The other creatures answered from the darkness, their voices getting closer. "We need to go," Lisa said, "right now." The lead creature stepped aside, still pointing toward the forest. It wanted me to follow it into the darkness, away from my friends and my weapons. Instead, I grabbed an emergency flare from my pack and fired it into the air. The bright red light burst overhead, and suddenly the forest was lit up like day. The creatures scattered, but not before I got a clear look at all of them. 8 bipedal wolves, each one 7 feet tall or bigger. They moved with coordinated intelligence, like a military unit retreating according to plan. In the few seconds before they disappeared, I saw something that made my scientific mind reel. The largest one, the leader, was wearing something around its neck. Something that looked like a park ranger badge. As the flare burned out and darkness returned, I heard them howling from deeper in the forest. But this time, the howls sounded different. Frustrated, like they'd been planning something that didn't work out. "Did you see that?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. "The badges?" Lisa nodded. "Jesus, Dave, what are we dealing with here?" I thought about Joe Crow Feather's stories. Men who became wolves but kept their human thoughts. What if some of the missing people over the years hadn't died? What if they'd been transformed? We packed up and hiked out that night, using flashlights and staying close together. Nobody talked much during the 6-hour walk to the main road. We were all thinking the same thing. Those things in the forest weren't just animals, they were something much worse. They were people like us, changed into something that hunted their own species, and their leader knew who I was. Back at the ranger station, I did something that should have gotten me fired. I accessed the personnel records going back 30 years, looking for rangers who had disappeared or died in the Ravens Hollow area. What I found made everything click into place. In 1978, a ranger named Robert Bobby Morrison had vanished during a routine patrol of the area. He was an experienced outdoorsman, 28 years old, single. His truck was found at the trailhead, but Bobby was never seen again. In the official report, there was a description of his equipment, including his ranger badge, a distinctive silver shield with a unique serial number. I compared that serial number to the photos I'd taken during our encounter. The badge around the lead creature's neck was a match. Bobby Morrison hadn't died in 1978. He'd been transformed. I spent the next day researching Cherokee curse traditions with Joe Crow Feather. What I learned was terrifying. The Night Wolf curse was reserved for the worst violators of sacred law, Joe explained. People who hunted in forbidden areas, who took more than they needed, who showed no respect for the balance of nature. But how does it work? The stories say that those who are cursed retain their human intelligence, but their human emotions are replaced by wolf instincts. They become perfect predators, but they're still smart enough to use tools, make plans, work together. Can it be reversed? Joe shook his head. Once someone becomes a night wolf, they're bound to guard the sacred places forever. They can't leave, can't change back, can't die of old age. They exist to punish anyone who violates the boundaries. That night, I sat in my cabin trying to process what I'd learned. Bobby Morrison had been missing for 7 years. In that time, he'd apparently built a pack of other transformed people. They were protecting Ravens Hollow by killing or transforming anyone who came too far into their territory. The question was, what had Bobby done to deserve the curse in the first place? I found the answer in his personal file. 3 weeks before he disappeared, Bobby had been investigating reports of illegal hunting in the Ravens Hollow area. Deer had been found killed and left to rot, way more than any normal hunter would take. Someone was slaughtering animals for sport. The last entry in Bobby's log mentioned that he was planning to stake out the area during the full moon, when the illegal hunting seemed to happen most often. He must have caught the poachers in the act. But instead of arresting them, something else had happened. Something that triggered the ancient curse and transformed everyone involved. Now they were all trapped there, guarding the valley for eternity. I should have reported everything and let someone else handle it. But I kept thinking about that photographer, Tom Bradley. Was he dead, or had he been turned into one of those things? How many other missing people were now part of Bobby's pack? I had to go back. This time, I went alone, and I went prepared. I brought a rifle loaded with silver bullets. Joe had insisted that silver was the only thing that could really hurt them. I also carried flares, a GPS beacon, and enough supplies for one night. My plan was simple. Get into Raven's Hollow, try to communicate with Bobby Morrison, and find out if there was any way to break the curse. I hiked in during the late afternoon and set up camp in the same spot where we'd encountered the pack before. If they wanted to find me, they'd know where to look. I didn't have to wait long. Just after sunset, I heard the familiar howling starting up around the valley. But this time, I was ready. When the first pair of eyes as colander appeared in the darkness beyond my fire, I called out, "Bobby Morrison, I know who you are. I want to talk." The eyes disappeared, then reappeared closer. Slowly, the lead creature stepped into the firelight. Up close, he was even more terrifying. 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark gray fur, with muscles that rippled under his skin. But the face still had elements of human features, mixed with the wolf characteristics. And around his neck, the old ranger badge caught the firelight. "Bobby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm Ranger Dave Hawthorne. I know what happened to you." The creature, Bobby, tilted his head and made a sound that might have been trying to speak. But all that came out was a low growl. "You were investigating poachers," I continued. "You caught them in the sacred hunting grounds. The curse got all of you." Bobby's eyes showed recognition. He understood every word. Other members of his pack emerged from the forest. I counted 9 of them, all standing upright, all watching me with intelligent eyes. One of them was smaller and more recently transformed, probably Tom Bradley. Bobby pointed at me, then pointed at the forest. The same gesture as before. "Come with us." "I can't do that, Bobby. But maybe there's another way to end this." I pulled out a folder of documents I'd brought with me. I know about the Cherokee curse traditions. Joe Crow Feather told me the old stories. You're trapped here, guarding this place until someone breaks the cycle. Bobby's ears perked up. He took a step closer. "The curse was meant to punish people who violated sacred boundaries," I said. "But you weren't a violator. You were trying to stop the violators. The curse got you by mistake." Bobby made that growling sound again, but this time it sounded more like he was trying to agree. "If I can document what really happened, if I can prove that you were protecting the sacred areas instead of violating them, maybe the curse can be lifted." For a moment, I thought I was getting through to him. Bobby looked at his pack, then back at me. His human intelligence was clearly fighting against his wolf instincts. Then everything went wrong. One of the other pack members, probably driven by hunger or territorial instinct, lunged at me from the side. I dove away from the fire, rolling into the darkness. Bobby roared, a sound that was half howl, half human shout. He was trying to control his pack, but their predator instincts were taking over. I came up running, crashing through the underbrush with 9 werewolves behind me. My only advantage was that I knew these woods better than anyone. I made it about half a mile before they surrounded me in a small clearing. They approached slowly, with Bobby in the lead. His eyes were different now, less human, more wolf. The intelligence was still there, but it was being overwhelmed by the need to hunt. "Bobby, fight it," I called out. "You're still human inside. Don't let the curse win." He stopped about 10 feet away and looked at me with what might have been sadness. Then he raised his head and howled. It wasn't a hunting call or a territorial warning. It was the sound of someone saying goodbye. The other pack members tensed, ready to attack. I raised my rifle, but I knew I wouldn't be able to get them all. Then, just as Bobby was about to give the final command, the sun came up. I don't know if it was coincidence or if Bobby had been fighting the curse longer than I realized, but we'd been running through the forest for hours. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, and something about the sunlight changed everything. The pack members looked around in confusion, their aggressive postures relaxing. Bobby's eyes became more human again. For just a moment, I saw the man he used to be. He looked at me one last time, then gestured toward the trail out of the valley. "Go," he was saying. "Leave now, while you can." I didn't argue. I hiked out of Raven's Hollow as fast as I could, looking over my shoulder the whole way. But I could feel them watching me from the shadows, making sure I really left their territory. I submitted my report 3 days later, but I left out most of the supernatural details. Instead, I focused on the safety issues and recommended that Raven's Hollow be permanently closed to the public. Aggressive wildlife in the area, I wrote. Coordinated pack behavior that presents an unacceptable risk to visitors. The Park Service accepted my recommendation. Raven's Hollow was designated a restricted zone, off limits to everyone except essential personnel. Warning signs were posted at all trail entrances. But I couldn't let it go. I kept researching Cherokee folklore and cursed traditions, looking for some way to help Bobby Morrison and his pack. What I found wasn't encouraging. According to the old stories, the only way to break a Nightwolf curse was for the cursed person to willingly sacrifice themselves to save someone who represented pure innocence. Fat chance of that happening in the middle of nowhere. I also learned that the curse could spread. Anyone who spent too much time in the territory of Nightwolves risked being transformed themselves. That explained the missing hikers over the years. Some had been killed, but others had been added to the pack. I started having nightmares about Bobby Morrison's eyes, about the intelligence trapped inside that wolf body. I'd wake up in cold sweats, wondering if I'd been exposed to the curse during my encounters with the pack. My supervisor noticed the change in me. I became obsessive about moon cycles, tracking when the attacks were most likely to occur. I started carrying silver bullets in my service weapon, against all regulations. I refused to guide any hiking groups into the areas adjacent to Raven's Hollow. "Dave, you need to take some time," Jim Rodriguez finally told me. "Whatever happened out there, it's eating you up inside." But I couldn't take time off. I felt responsible for everyone who entered my section of the park. I was the only one who knew what was really lurking in those mountains. 6 months later, the attacks spread. Rangers in other Cherokee ancestral areas started reporting similar incidents. Hikers disappearing, campsites destroyed, evidence of large bipedal canines. Each incident happened during full moon cycles, and each one followed the same pattern. I realized that Bobby's pack wasn't the only one. The curse was active in multiple locations across the Smoky Mountains, wherever ancient sacred boundaries had been violated. I tried to warn the other rangers, but how do you explain something like this? I gave presentations about coordinated pack predators and unusual wildlife behavior, but I couldn't tell them the truth. Most of them thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I started spending my off-duty time with Joe Crow Feather, learning more about Cherokee spiritual traditions. He taught me how to recognize the warning signs of curse activity, how to identify sacred boundaries, and most importantly, how to show proper respect for the old ways. "The Nightwolves aren't evil," Joe explained. "They're doing what they were cursed to do, protecting the places that are supposed to be protected. The tragedy is that good people like your friend Bobby got caught up in something that was meant for poachers and violators. Is there really no way to help them? Maybe," he said, "but it would require someone to willingly enter their territory and offer themselves as a replacement guardian. Someone who truly understood the sacred nature of the land and was willing to take on the curse voluntarily." I thought about that conversation a lot over the following months. 2 years have passed since my first encounter with Bobby Morrison's pack. Raven's Hollow remains closed to the public, and the incidents there have stopped. But I know the pack is still there, still guarding their cursed territory. Sometimes, when I'm patrolling the areas nearby, I see eyes watching me from the deep forest. I've learned to recognize the difference between normal animal eyes and theirs. They're always aware, always intelligent, always sad. I've also learned to respect the boundaries they protect. There are places in these mountains that humans aren't meant to go, especially during certain moon cycles. The Cherokee knew this for thousands of years, and their warnings should have been heeded. I still carry silver bullets, and I still track the lunar calendar. Other rangers think I'm paranoid, but I've managed to keep hikers away from the dangerous areas without having to explain why. Most importantly, I've learned to work with Joe Crow Feather and other Cherokee elders to identify and respect sacred sites throughout the park system. It's the only way to prevent more people from being cursed like Bobby Morrison. Because here's what I know now that I didn't know 3 years ago. There are boundaries in this world that aren't marked on any map. There are guardians watching from the shadows, making sure those boundaries aren't crossed. And when the wolves stand up and look you in the eye, when they point toward the forest and beckon you to follow, that's when you know you've gone too far. Some places belong to the night. Some watchers never sleep, and some curses are meant to last forever. Asterisk. Final word count, approximately 4,200 words. Asterisk. My name is Patricia Blackbird, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a forest ranger here in North Carolina for 13 years now. People trust me because I know these mountains like the back of my hand. I have a degree in marine biology, and I can tell you the name of every fish, every bug, every tiny thing that lives in our mountain streams. But I'm about to tell you something that will make you think I've lost my mind. It was August 1994, and we were having the worst drought in 50 years. The creek beds were showing rocks that hadn't seen sunlight since my grandmother was a girl. Copper Creek, my favorite spot in all of Pisgah National Forest, was running so low you could walk across places that used to be swimming holes. I loved Copper Creek. It was 8 miles from the ranger station, tucked back in the wilderness where you needed ropes just to get down to the water. Crystal clear mountain water that stayed cold even in summer. The Cherokee people called it sacred, and I could see why. It was the kind of place that made you whisper. My son Jake was 16 that summer, and he thought I was crazy for spending so much time studying water bugs and fish. "Mom, why don't you get a normal job?" he'd say. But this work was everything to me. I'd grown up hearing my grandmother's Cherokee stories about water spirits, but my science training taught me that every mystery had a logical explanation. That morning, I was heading down to check my water monitoring equipment. The drought had me worried about the fish populations. I rappelled down the steep rocks with my gear bag, breathing in that clean mountain air. Everything seemed normal, until I got to the first deep pool. The water was wrong. Not just low, wrong. In 13 years of studying this creek, I'd never seen it so still. Mountain water moves, even in the deepest pools. There's always a current, always tiny ripples. This water looked like dark glass. And it was cold. Way too cold. I stuck my hand in and jerked it back. The water was ice cold, maybe 50 degrees. In August, after weeks of 90-degree heat. That was impossible. I set up my testing equipment anyway. Maybe an underground spring had opened up. Maybe the drought had changed the flow patterns. I'm a scientist. I look for logical answers. But when I tested the pH levels, my equipment gave me readings that made no sense. And when I looked for the fish that should have been everywhere, the trout, the salamanders, the water insects, I found nothing. The creek was empty of life. Completely empty. I'd been monitoring this creek for 5 years. I knew every species, every seasonal pattern. A healthy mountain stream should be full of life. This was like looking at sterile water. I checked 3 more pools. Same thing. Dead water. Too cold. Too still. As I packed up my gear, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Splashing. From the deepest pool, the one locals called Devil's Bath. But when I looked, the water was perfectly still again. I told myself it was a rock falling, maybe a deer drinking, anything except what my grandmother's stories whispered in the back of my mind. Walking back to my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from beneath that dark water. 3 days later, I got the call that changed everything. "Patty, we need you at Copper Creek. 3 college kids went swimming yesterday and never came back." Sheriff Morrison's voice was tight. He'd worked these mountains for 20 years and lost hikers before, but something about this was different. I drove out there with the search and rescue team. The college kids, 2 boys and a girl from Asheville, had told their friends they were going swimming in the secret pools they'd heard about. Their car was still parked at the trailhead. Their clothes were still folded neatly on a flat rock beside Devil's Bath. Too neatly. "Looks like they just stepped out of their clothes and walked into the water," said Tom, our best tracker. He was staring at the pile of clothes with a confused look. But there's no signs of struggle. No footprints in the mud. Nothing. I suited up for a dive. The water was still that impossible cold, so clear I could see 30 feet down. The pool was deeper than I remembered, maybe 40 feet to the bottom. I swam down with my underwater camera, looking for any sign of the missing kids. What I found instead made me surface gasping. There were scratch marks in the solid rock at the bottom of the pool. Deep gouges, like claw marks, but bigger than any animal I knew. And they weren't random scratches. They formed patterns, almost like symbols. My camera malfunctioned when I tried to photograph them. The underwater housing fogged up instantly, even though I'd checked it twice on the surface. My depth gauge started spinning wildly. Even my diving watch stopped working. "Find anything?" Sheriff Morrison called when I surfaced. I almost told him about the scratches. But what could I say? That someone, or something, had clawed symbols into solid rock 40 feet underwater. He'd think the cold water had gotten to my head. "No bodies," I said instead. "But the water's acting strange. Temperature's all wrong." We searched for 2 more days. Brought in divers from Charlotte. Used sonar equipment. Dragged the pools with nets. Nothing. 3 healthy college kids had vanished without a trace in water too shallow to drown in. The night after we called off the search, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those scratch marks, about the dead water, about the way the kids' clothes were arranged so perfectly. Like someone had folded them, like someone had been expecting them. I drove back to Copper Creek at dawn, telling myself I was going to take more water samples. But really, I needed to see those scratch marks again. I needed to prove to myself they were real. The morning mist was thick over the water. As I set up my diving gear, I heard it again, that splashing sound. But this time, when I looked toward Devil's Bath, I saw something that made my hands shake. There was something moving under the water, something big, too big to be a fish, moving too smooth to be a person. It was swimming in circles, like it was patrolling. I grabbed my camera and dove in, following the movement. My heart was pounding so hard I was burning through my air fast. The water was even colder than before, so cold it hurt my exposed skin. 20 feet down, I saw it clearly. It looked like a person from behind. Pale skin, long dark hair floating in the water. But it was swimming without air, without coming up to breathe. And its movements were wrong, too fluid, too graceful. Like it belonged in the water. I swam closer, and it turned toward me. That's when I saw its face. It was human, but not human. The eyes were too big, too dark. There were slits along its neck that opened and closed like gills. And when it smiled at me, I saw teeth that were too sharp, too many. I screamed underwater, wasting precious air. The thing just watched me, floating there like it was curious. Then it pointed deeper into the pool, toward a dark opening in the rocks that I'd never noticed before. A cave. There was an underwater cave. The thing swam toward the cave, moving its arms in a way that looked almost like it was beckoning me to follow. I surfaced fast, too fast, not caring about decompression. I thrashed to shore and lay on the rocks, gasping and shaking. What I had seen was impossible, but I had seen it. And somewhere in the back of my mind, my grandmother's voice was whispering words I'd tried to forget. "The water keepers are always watching, little bird. They protect the sacred places from those who would harm them." I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? Instead, I started researching. I drove to the Cherokee Reservation and found my grandmother's cousin, Elder Mary Swimmer. She was 93 years old and still sharp as a knife. "You saw one of them," she said when I finally worked up the courage to describe what I'd seen. We were sitting on her porch, drinking sweet tea like I was asking about the weather. "One of what?" "The water keepers. The guardians of the sacred springs." She rocked in her chair, studying my face. "Your grandmother told you the stories when you were small. You just forgot them when you started thinking like a white scientist. Mary, what I saw, it wasn't human. No, they were human once, long ago, but they chose to become something else to protect the waters." She leaned forward. "Tell me, child, how clean is Copper Creek these days?" I thought about the chemical plant 20 miles upstream, the new housing development, the runoff from the highway, not as clean as it should be. The water keepers feel every poison that touches their streams. They're getting desperate, trying to save what's left. Sometimes desperate beings do desperate things. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the 3 missing college kids. Had they really drowned, or had something else happened to them? I went back to Copper Creek the next morning, but this time I brought backup. Jake had borrowed a friend's underwater camera, the expensive kind that was supposed to work in any conditions. I also brought Elder Mary's blessing, a small pouch of sacred tobacco she'd given me for protection. The water was even stranger than before. Thick mist rose from every pool, even though the air was warm. And the silence was complete. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Like the whole forest was holding its breath. I dove into Devil's Bath again, following the rocky wall down to where I'd seen the cave opening. It was there, all right, a tunnel that led back into the mountain. My lights showed it going much deeper than I could safely explore alone. But I wasn't alone. They came out of the cave like a school of fish, but walking upright on 2 legs. 5 of them, moving through the water like they'd been born to it. The water keepers. They surrounded me, not threatening, just curious. Up close, I could see they had once been human. Their basic shape was right, but their skin had a greenish tint, and they all had those gill slits along their necks. Their fingers were webbed, their feet elongated for swimming. The one in front, I think it was the same one I'd seen before, gestured for me to follow them into the cave. Every instinct told me to swim away as fast as I could. But something in their movements wasn't hostile. They seemed sad, desperate. I followed them into the cave. The tunnel opened into a huge underwater chamber, lit by some kind of phosphorescent algae. And there, arranged on natural rock shelves around the walls, were the 3 missing college students. They were alive, but they were changing. Their skin had that same greenish tint as the water keepers. Gill slits were forming along their necks. They were breathing water instead of air, floating peacefully with their eyes closed. The lead water keeper pointed to them, then to the cave entrance, then to me. The message was clear. This could be your fate too. But then, it did something I wasn't expecting. It showed me something else. In an alcove deeper in the cave, there were dozens of other people. Some looked recently changed, others seemed older, their transformation more complete. They all had the same peaceful expression, like they were dreaming. The water keeper touched my shoulder, and suddenly I could hear its voice in my mind. Not words exactly, but feelings and images. I saw Copper Creek as it used to be, crystal clear water teeming with life. I saw the Cherokee people coming to the sacred pools for ceremonies. I saw the water keepers in their original human forms, the guardians chosen to protect this holy place. Then I saw the changes. The chemical plant upstream dumping waste in the dark of night, housing developments pouring concrete and lawn chemicals into the watershed. The slow death of everything that lived in the water. The water keepers had tried to adapt, changing themselves to survive in the poisoned water. But survival wasn't enough. They needed to save their sacred stream, and they believed the only way to do that was to transform people, to create more guardians who could help them fight the pollution. They weren't evil. They were dying, and they were trying to save the last sacred water they had left. But the college kids, they hadn't chosen this. They'd been taken, transformed against their will. The water keeper released my shoulder, and I kicked toward the surface, my mind reeling. I broke through into air and found myself in a small air pocket at the top of the cave. I could breathe, but I was trapped 40 feet underwater with no way out except past the water keepers. That's when I realized the truth that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about Copper Creek. The elder had mentioned other sacred springs, other water sources. If the water keepers were this desperate here, what was happening at every polluted stream, every poisoned lake, every contaminated river? How many people had already been taken, and how many more would disappear before someone stopped them? I floated in that air pocket for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The water keepers waited below, their dark eyes watching me through the clear water. I could feel their patience, but also their determination. They had shown me their truth. Now, they wanted my answer. I thought about Jake, about how he'd never see his mom again if I didn't make it out of this cave. I thought about all the other families who'd lost people to unexplained drownings over the years. I thought about the Cherokee stories my grandmother had told me, about the balance between humans and nature. But mostly, I thought about those college kids, floating peacefully in their water-filled dreams, becoming something they'd never chosen to be. I dove back down to where the water keepers waited. The leader approached me again, and this time when it touched my shoulder, I didn't fight the connection. I let it show me everything. I saw the water through their eyes. Every chemical, every poison, every piece of plastic that had ever touched their sacred stream. I felt their pain as the pollution slowly killed everything they were meant to protect. I understood their desperation, but I also showed them something in return. I opened my mind and let them see my 13 years as a ranger. My water quality reports. My fights with the chemical plant to reduce their discharge. My work with environmental groups to protect the watershed. My Cherokee heritage and my respect for the sacred places. I showed them that there were humans who cared, who were fighting to save the water without transforming innocent people against their will. The waterkeeper's grip on my shoulder loosened. I felt confusion from it, maybe even hope. I pointed to the sleeping college students, then made a gesture toward the cave entrance. Let them go, I tried to communicate. Let them choose. The waterkeeper shook its head. Once the change starts, it can't be reversed. The students were too far along in their transformation to survive as humans now. But it made me a different offer. It showed me an image of myself, but changed. Gills along my neck, webbed fingers, able to breathe underwater indefinitely. I could become like them willingly, help them protect all the sacred waters in the mountains. Together, we could fight the pollution, save the streams, guard the places that needed guardians, and I would live, forever beneath the water, watching over the places my grandmother had taught me to love. For a moment, I almost said yes. The offer was beautiful in its way, eternal life devoted to protecting the natural world. But then I thought about Jake again, about the life I still had to live on the surface. I shook my head. The waterkeeper's expression changed. Not angry, but sad. It gestured to the others, and they began to move toward me. That's when I remembered Elder Mary's tobacco pouch. Cherokee sacred tobacco, blessed for protection. I pulled it from my gear bag and held it up. The waterkeepers stopped immediately, their dark eyes fixed on the small pouch. I opened it and let the tobacco drift into the water around us. The effect was immediate. The waterkeepers backed away, not in fear but in respect. This was sacred to them too, a reminder of the old ways, the original covenant between their people and the Cherokee. In that moment of clarity, I think we understood each other perfectly. I pointed to myself, then to the surface, then back to the cave. I would go back to my work as a ranger. I would fight the pollution through human laws and human persistence. I would protect their sacred waters in my own way. In return, they would stop taking people. No more disappearances. No more forced transformations. The lead waterkeeper studied me for a long moment. Then it nodded slowly. It gestured to one of the others, who disappeared deeper into the cave. When it returned, it was carrying something that made my heart stop, a waterproof bag. Inside were driver's licenses, jewelry, personal items, belongings of people who had drowned in mountain streams over the past 20 years. There were dozens of them. The waterkeeper handed me the bag, then pointed toward the cave entrance. It was letting me go. But it was also giving me proof of what had been happening, and the responsibility to decide what to do with that knowledge. I swam toward the cave entrance, the waterkeepers parting to let me pass. As I reached the tunnel, the leader touched my shoulder one last time. In my mind, I heard something that might have been words. Keep your promise, water sister. The sacred places are dying. Help us save them, or we will have no choice but to save them ourselves. Then I was swimming up through 40 feet of mountain water, my lungs burning, praying I had enough air to reach the surface. I broke through into sunlight and gasped air that had never tasted so sweet. I never reported what I found in that cave. How could I? Instead, I told Sheriff Morrison that the college students must have been swept into an underground river system by a flash flood. It happens in these mountains, especially during droughts, when the cave systems are unpredictable. He accepted my explanation, but I could see in his eyes that he knew I wasn't telling him everything. The bag of personal belongings from 20 years of drownings sits in my closet at home. Sometimes I take it out and look through the licenses, the wedding rings, the photographs. Real people with real families who never learned what happened to their loved ones. But if I told the truth, who would believe me? And what would happen to the waterkeepers if I did? They were trying to save something sacred in the only way they knew how. Destroying them wouldn't bring back the people they'd taken. Instead, I kept my promise. I've spent the last 6 months building a case against the chemical plant upstream from Copper Creek, Water quality violations, illegal dumping, contamination of wildlife habitat. It's slow work, but it's the human way to fight for the water. I've also been working with Elder Mary and the Tribal Council to get Copper Creek officially protected as a sacred site. If I can get it federal protection, it'll be much harder for anyone to pollute it. Jake thinks I've gone crazy with environmental activism. Mom, you used to just study the fish. Now you're practically chaining yourself to trees. If only he knew. I go back to Copper Creek every few weeks to check my monitoring equipment. The water is slowly getting cleaner, not much, but enough to notice. Fish are starting to return to some of the pools. The temperature has gone back to normal. And I haven't seen the water keepers since that day in the cave. But sometimes, early in the morning, when the mist is thick over the water, I see ripples in Devil's Bath that don't match the current. Sometimes I find my equipment moved overnight, repositioned to get better readings from the deepest parts of the creek. They're still there, still watching, still protecting their sacred water. But they're letting me help them in my own way. For now, last week, Jake asked me why I always warn him and his friends to stay away from the swimming holes during droughts. The water's dangerous when it's low, I tell him. You never know what you might find in the deep places. He laughs and calls me paranoid. But he stays away from Copper Creek, and he makes sure his friends do too. Some knowledge is too heavy to share, even with the people you love most. Some promises are too important to break, even when keeping them means carrying secrets that wake you up at night. The Cherokee have a saying, water is life. But they also know that some water is sacred, and sacred things require guardians. I've become a guardian now, in my own way. Not transformed like the others, but changed just the same. I protect the sacred waters with spreadsheets and legal documents and testimony before county commissioners. I fight the pollution with science and persistence and bureaucratic stubbornness. And when that's not enough, when the politicians ignore the science and the polluters break the law and the sacred waters start dying again, well, I know there are others watching from the deep places. Others who've made different choices about how to protect what they love. The water keepers are patient, but their patience isn't infinite. And every time I see a new housing development planned near a mountain stream, every time another chemical plant applies for discharge permits, every time someone treats our sacred waters like a sewer, I remember the feel of gills opening along my neck and webbed fingers cutting through the cold, dark water. The choice is still there, waiting for me in the depths of Devil's Bath. For now, I choose the human way of fighting for the water. But the offer remains open, and the sacred places are still dying. My name is Patricia Blackbird, and I've told you the truth about what lies beneath Copper Creek. Whether you believe me or not doesn't matter. What matters is this: the next time you're near mountain water, especially during a drought, remember that some places are sacred. And sacred places have guardians. They're always watching from the deep places. They're always waiting. My name is Elizabeth Grayfall, but everyone calls me Liz. I've been a park ranger here in Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest for 20 years now. Before that, I taught geology at the university until they cut my job. Seems like they always cut the science programs first. I'm 48 years old, and I know these mountains like the back of my hand. Every trail, every rock face, every dangerous spot where city folks think they can play weekend warrior. My specialty is keeping the rock climbers safe. God knows they need it. People ask me why I became a ranger instead of finding another teaching job. The truth is, after my husband died in a climbing accident 5 years ago, I couldn't stand being stuck in a classroom anymore. Out here, I can actually help people. I can make sure what happened to David doesn't happen to anyone else. Raven Rock is my main area. It's a 300-foot cliff face made of old limestone, probably formed about 400 million years ago during the Devonian period. The Seneca people lived here long before any of us, and they left some interesting rock carvings near the base. Most climbers don't even notice them. They're too busy looking up at the routes. It was October 1987 when everything changed. We'd been having weird weather, way too warm for the season, like summer was fighting back against fall. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, but it kept holding off. My equipment had been acting up too. Radios would crackle with static, and my GPS would spin around like it couldn't find north. The local Seneca folks had always told stories about Raven Rock. They said spirits lived inside the stone, in Cakesack and Hint, angry spirits that had been trapped there as punishment. I'd heard these stories plenty of times during community meetings. The elders would warn people to stay away from certain parts of the cliff, especially during storms. As a geologist, I figured it was just old folklore mixed with some real acoustic effects. You know how wind can whistle through cracks in rock and sound almost human? Plus, limestone caves can create all kinds of echoes and strange noises. I'd studied this stuff for 25 years. Rocks don't scream. But then, the climbing team came to see me. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was checking my gear at the ranger station when 3 climbers walked in. They looked shaken up, which was weird because these weren't beginners. Jake Martinez had been climbing for 15 years. Sarah Chen was a certified instructor. Tom Bradley had done routes all over the country. Ranger Grayfall, Jake said, we need to report something strange about Raven Rock. I poured them coffee and sat down. What happened up there? Sarah wrapped her hands around her mug like she was cold, even though it was 70 degrees outside. We were about halfway up the main route yesterday. Everything was going fine, and then she looked at the other 2. Tom picked up the story. We heard screaming, he said. Human screaming, coming from inside the rock face. I leaned back in my chair. Could have been wind through the... No, Jake interrupted. This wasn't wind. This was a person screaming for help, multiple people actually. And it was coming from solid rock, not from any crack or cave opening. They all nodded. Sarah pulled out her climbing notes. We marked the spot, she said. About 150 feet up, just past the first overhang. The sound was so clear, so desperate, like someone was buried alive in there. I looked at their faces. These weren't the kind of people who spooked easily. And they weren't the type to make up stories for attention. Did you finish the climb? I asked. Hell no, Tom said. We rappelled down immediately. Whatever's in that rock, we didn't want to get any closer to it. After they left, I sat in my office, staring at the topographic map of Raven Rock. I'd climbed that route myself dozens of times. I'd never heard anything unusual, but then again, I'd always climbed alone. Maybe group noise covered up whatever sounds they'd heard. As a ranger, it was my job to investigate any safety concerns. As a scientist, I was curious about what could cause acoustic phenomena strong enough to scare experienced climbers. I decided to check it out myself the next morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my husband David and how confident he'd been before his last climb. Just a routine check, he'd said. I'll be back by dinner. But he never came back. The rescue team found him at the bottom of Devil's Spine, about 10 miles from Raven Rock. Equipment failure, they said. His rope had somehow snapped, a brand new rope that should have held twice his weight. I shook off the memory and started packing my gear for tomorrow's investigation. Standard climbing equipment, plus some extra safety gear and my geological survey tools. If there was something weird about the rock composition at that spot, I'd find it. Outside my cabin, the wind was picking up. Storm clouds were finally building on the horizon, and the air smelled like rain. The Weather Service had issued a warning about possible electrical activity. Perfect climbing weather, I thought sarcastically. But if something was wrong with that route, I needed to know before more climbers got hurt. I just had no idea what I was really going to find up there. I got to Raven Rock just after sunrise. The morning was still and quiet. Too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds, squirrels, maybe a woodpecker working on the old oak trees. But the forest around the cliff was silent. Even the bugs weren't making noise. I checked my equipment one more time. Climbing harness, helmet, rope, protection gear, first aid kit, plus my geological hammer, sample bags, and a small tape recorder in case I heard whatever had spooked the climbing team. The base of Raven Rock was covered with loose stones and old tree roots. The Seneca petroglyphs were carved into a flat section of limestone about 10 feet from where most climbers started their routes. I'd looked at them many times before, but this morning something seemed different. The carvings showed human figures, but they weren't standing or walking like in most Native American rock art. These figures looked like they were pushing against something, their mouths open like they were shouting or screaming. Below them were wavy lines that could represent water or maybe something flowing underground. I'd never really studied them closely before. Most of my attention was always focused on the climbing routes and safety issues. But now, looking at these ancient pictures after hearing the climber's story, they seemed almost like a warning. I started up the main route. It's rated 5.7, which means it's moderately difficult but not dangerous for someone with my experience. The first 50 feet went smooth. Good handholds, solid rock, no problems. At 100 feet, I stopped at a ledge to rest and check my gear. Everything looked fine. The rope was running clean, my protection was solid. The morning sun was warming the rock face, and I could hear traffic from the highway about 2 miles away. Normal. Everything felt completely normal. I continued climbing toward the 150-foot mark where the team had heard the screaming. The route curved around a small overhang here, and I had to use some tricky moves to get past it. This was probably where they would have been most focused on their climbing, not paying attention to sounds. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just my breathing echoing off the rock. But as I hung there in my harness, listening, I realized the sound was coming from somewhere else. It was a voice. A human voice, muffled and distant, but definitely real. "Help me," it said. "Please, help me." The voice was coming from inside the rock face, about 3 feet to my left. I moved closer and pressed my ear against the limestone. The sound was clearer now. Definitely a person, probably a man, sounding weak and desperate. "Hello?" I called out. "Can you hear me? Where are you?" The voice got more excited. Yes, I can hear you. I'm trapped. I've been trapped for so long." My mind raced through possibilities. Could someone have fallen into a crack or cave opening higher up and gotten stuck? But I couldn't see any openings in the rock face. And how would someone survive being trapped long enough to still be calling for help? I pulled out my geological hammer and tapped on the rock where the voice was strongest. Solid limestone. No hollow spaces. The sound didn't change. But the voice got louder. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me like the others." Others? What others? I tapped again, harder this time. The rock felt completely solid, but small pieces of limestone started flaking off under my hammer. That was weird. This type of rock shouldn't crumble so easily. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the fresh surface where the limestone had flaked away, I could see what looked like a human hand. Just the outline, like a fossil, but the detail was perfect. 5 fingers, a thumb, even the lines you'd see on a palm. "Oh God," I whispered. I scraped away more of the surface rock with my hammer. More of the hand appeared, then part of a wrist. The detail was incredible. It looked like someone had pressed their hand against wet concrete and left a perfect impression. But limestone doesn't form that way. This rock was millions of years old. The voice called out again, closer now, like it was right behind the thin layer of stone. "You found me. You found my hand. Can you get me out?" I dropped my hammer. It fell about 200 feet to the forest floor with a distant crash. This was impossible. People don't get fossilized in limestone, especially not while they're still alive and talking. I had to be hallucinating, maybe from altitude or stress or the strange weather. But then another voice joined the first one. "Help us," it said. This one sounded like a woman. "We're all trapped in here, so many of us." I looked around wildly. The voices seemed to be coming from different parts of the rock face now. I pressed my hands against the stone in several places, and each spot felt warm, like there was body heat just underneath. "How long have you been in there?" I called out, feeling crazy for talking to a rock wall. "Years," the man's voice answered. "Decades. Some of us have been here since before your grandfather was born." The woman's voice added, "They put us here for our crimes. The stone spirits judge us, and the stone spirits punish us." Stone spirits. That was from the Seneca stories. But this had to be some kind of acoustic trick, sound bouncing around from somewhere else. People don't live inside solid rock. I started to climb down, moving faster than I should have. I needed to get back to the ranger station and figure out what was really happening. Maybe there was a cave system behind the cliff that I didn't know about. Maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank. But as I rappelled down, the voices followed me. "Don't leave us. We've been alone so long. Please come back." By the time I reached the ground, I was shaking. I looked up at the cliff face, and for just a second, I could swear I saw shapes moving under the surface of the rock. shadows that looked like people pressing against the inside of the limestone, trying to get out. I packed my gear quickly and headed back to my truck. I needed to research the history of this place, talk to some of the Seneca elders, maybe bring some proper geological equipment back tomorrow. As I drove away, I kept checking my rearview mirror. The cliff face looked normal in the distance, just gray limestone and climbing routes. But I could still hear the voices in my head. Don't leave us like the others. What others had been here before me? And why didn't they help? I spent the rest of that day in the ranger station, going through every report and incident file related to Raven Rock. What I found made my stomach turn cold. Over the past 60 years, there had been 17 climbing accidents at that cliff. Not just equipment failures or falls, weird accidents that didn't make sense. Climbers found with their gear somehow melted into the rock face. Rescue teams discovering people with broken bones that looked like they'd been squeezed by something incredibly strong. And 3 climbers who had just vanished completely. The most recent disappearance was in 1985. A solo climber named Marcus Webb had signed in at the ranger station, saying he planned to spend the day on Raven Rock's main route. His car was found in the parking area 3 days later. His gear was discovered at the base of the cliff, neatly arranged like someone had carefully placed it there. But Marcus Webb was never seen again. I pulled out the incident photos from his file. There was something wrong with the rock face in the background of the pictures. It looked different, darker somehow, with strange marks that could have been shadows or could have been something else. I called Joseph Crow Feather, a Seneca elder who sometimes helped the Park Service with cultural site protection. He was one of the few people who would talk openly about the old stories. Mr. Crowfeather, it's Ranger Grayfall. I need to ask you about Raven Rock. There was a long pause on the phone. What happened up there, Liz? I told him about the voices, the handprint in the stone, everything. I expected him to think I was losing my mind, but he just listened quietly. When I finished, he said, "You need to stay away from that place, especially now with the storms coming. The stone prison gets stronger during electrical weather." Stone prison? That's what my grandfather called it. Long time ago, before the white settlers came, our people had laws. Most crimes could be forgiven, but some were so bad that normal punishment wasn't enough. He paused, like he was deciding how much to tell me. The worst criminals, the ones who killed children or violated sacred places, they got a special punishment. The medicine men would call on the stone spirits to judge them. If the spirits agreed the person was truly evil, they would pull them into the living rock. You mean they were buried alive? No, not buried, absorbed. Made part of the stone itself, but still conscious, still aware. It was supposed to last forever, so they could think about their crimes. I felt sick. Are you saying there are really people trapped in that cliff? I'm saying my people believed in justice that lasted beyond death. And I'm saying you should trust what you saw today. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those voices begging for help. I kept thinking about Marcus Webb and the other missing climbers. What if they hadn't just disappeared? What if they were still there, trapped in the rock with the others? The next morning, I went back to Raven Rock. I told myself I was just doing my job, investigating a safety concern. But really, I couldn't stand the thought of people suffering while I did nothing. This time, I brought better equipment. A small jackhammer I'd borrowed from the maintenance department, plus climbing gear for a more thorough investigation. If there were people trapped in some kind of cave system, I was going to find them. The forest was still unnaturally quiet. As I approached the cliff, I noticed that some of the trees near the base looked sick. Their leaves were turning brown even though it was early fall, and several had lost branches like they'd been hit by lightning. But there hadn't been any storms yet. I started climbing toward the spot where I'd heard the voices yesterday. About halfway up, my rope started acting strange. It felt heavier than normal, like something was tugging on it from below. When I looked down, everything seemed fine, but the sensation continued. At 150 feet, I set up an anchor and called out to the rock face. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I came back to help. The response was immediate. Not just one voice now, but several, all talking at once. "You came back. We knew you would. The others always leave, but you're different." I pulled out the small jackhammer and started working on the area where I'd seen the handprint yesterday. The limestone came away easier than it should have, almost like it wanted to be removed. What I found underneath made me drop the tool. It wasn't just a handprint. It was an actual hand, perfectly preserved in the stone, like it had been dipped in concrete while still alive. The skin was gray but undamaged, the fingernails still intact, and I could swear I saw it twitch. "That's my hand," said the voice I'd heard first. "I've been trying to push through for so long. Can you free the rest of me?" I chipped away more limestone around the hand. An arm appeared, then a shoulder. The preservation was impossible. This looked like someone who had died yesterday, not decades ago. But the most horrible part was that the arm was warm. "Who are you?" I whispered. "My name is Samuel Crowfoot. I was judged by the stone spirits in 1924. My crime was, I hurt children. I deserved this punishment, but I've learned. I've changed. Please, I just want to see the sky again." More voices joined in from other parts of the cliff face. "Free us. We've suffered enough. We promise we won't hurt anyone." I started working faster with the jackhammer, driven by a desperate need to help these trapped souls. But as I freed more of Samuel's arm, something felt wrong. The stone around his body was warm, almost hot, and it seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Then Samuel's hand grabbed my wrist. His grip was incredibly strong, much stronger than any normal person's. His gray fingers wrapped around my arm like steel cables, and suddenly I felt a horrible pulling sensation, like something was trying to drag me into the rock face. "Let go!" I shouted, trying to pull away. "I need out," Samuel said, his voice now different, hungrier. "I need your place in the world. You can take mine in the stone." I realized with terror that this wasn't a rescue situation. This was a trap. The other voices were getting louder, more demanding. I looked around and saw hands and faces pressing against the limestone all over the cliff face. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all reaching toward me. "Take my place," they chanted. "Take my place in the stone." I pulled out my climbing knife and slammed the handle against Samuel's wrist. His grip loosened just enough for me to jerk free. I rappelled down as fast as I could, hands shaking as I worked the ropes. Behind me, the entire cliff face seemed to be moving. Shapes pressed against the stone from inside, human forms trying to break through. The voices rose to a screaming chorus of rage and desperation. "Come back! You have to take our place. That's how it works." I hit the ground and ran for my truck, without bothering to pack my gear properly. As I drove away, I looked back one more time. The cliff face was glowing with a faint red light, and I could see dozens of human shapes moving just beneath the surface of the stone. Now I understood what had happened to Marcus Webb and the other missing climbers. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been pulled into the rock to take the place of older prisoners, allowing those ancient criminals to escape back into the world. And they were still in there, waiting for the next person to get close enough. I went straight to Joseph Crow, Feather's house. He lived about 10 miles from the forest in a small cabin surrounded by traditional gardens. When he opened the door and saw my face, he immediately invited me in and made tea. "The stone prison tried to take you," he said. It wasn't a question. I told him everything, Samuel Crowfoot, the dozens of trapped people, how they had tried to pull me into the rock. My hands were still shaking as I described Samuel's impossible grip. Joseph nodded sadly. "This is what I was afraid of. The prison has been getting stronger, more restless." "You knew this would happen?" "My grandfather warned me. He said when the stone spirits first created the prison, it was meant to hold maybe a dozen of the worst criminals. But over the years, it kept taking more people. Not just criminals anymore, but anyone who got too close when the spirits were hungry." He pulled out an old leather journal filled with handwritten notes in both English and Seneca. "My family has been keeping track. Every few years, someone disappears at Raven Rock. The prison needs fresh souls to keep the old ones contained." I looked through the journal. Names, dates, descriptions of missing people going back over a century. Marcus Webb was there, along with 2 other recent climbers. But there were dozens more. Hikers, researchers, even a few Native Americans who had tried to perform cleansing ceremonies. So those people I heard, Samuel and the others, they're not the original criminals? Some might be. But most are probably innocent people who were taken to make room for worse prisoners. The stone spirits don't distinguish anymore. They just need the energy of living souls to maintain the prison. I felt sick. How do we stop it? Joseph was quiet for a long time. My grandfather said there was only one way. Someone would have to go into the prison willingly as a permanent guardian. Someone pure enough to resist the evil inside and strong enough to keep the race, others contained forever. You mean sacrifice themselves? Yes, but it would have to be someone who truly understood the responsibility. Someone who cared more about protecting others than saving themselves. That night, huge storms finally hit the area. Lightning crashed across the sky, and the rain came down in sheets. I sat in my cabin, listening to the weather and thinking about all those people trapped in the rock. Around midnight, my radio crackled to life. It was the emergency channel. Ranger Grayfall, we have a situation at Raven Rock. Multiple climbers are trapped on the cliff face. I grabbed my gear and drove through the storm. When I got to the parking area, I found 3 rescue vehicles and a crowd of people. A climbing club from Pittsburgh had been caught on the mountain when the storm hit. The rescue coordinator, Bill Santos, met me at my truck. We've got 5 climbers stuck about 200 feet up. They reached a ledge, but now they're too scared to move. They keep saying the rock is trying to grab them. Lightning flashed across the cliff face, and for a moment I could see the climbers huddled on their ledge. But I could also see something else, dozens of glowing shapes moving under the surface of the stone, all heading toward the trapped people. Bill, we need to get them down now. This isn't just a weather problem. What do you mean? Before I could answer, one of the climbers screamed. In the next lightning flash, I saw a gray hand reaching out of the solid rock, grabbing at the youngest climber's leg. The stone prison was making its move, using the storm's electrical energy to become more active than ever before. Everyone back to the vehicles, I shouted. This cliff isn't safe. But Bill and the other rescuers thought I was talking about lightning strikes. They started setting up gear for a technical rescue, not understanding the real danger. I grabbed my own climbing equipment and started up the cliff. If those people were going to be saved, I had to do it myself. And I was pretty sure I knew what it was going to cost me. The storm made climbing incredibly dangerous. Rain slicked the rock, and lightning turned every piece of metal gear into a potential death trap. But the worst danger was the things moving inside the stone. As I climbed, hands kept reaching out of the rock face, trying to grab my feet and legs. Faces pressed against the limestone, mouths open in silent screams. The trapped souls were more active than I'd ever seen them, energized by the electrical storm. Take our place, they whispered. Free us from this prison. I reached the ledge where the 5 climbers were trapped. They were all young people, probably college students. 3 were crying, and 2 looked like they were in shock. Ranger, one of them called out. The rock is alive. It's trying to eat us. As if to prove his point, a gray arm pushed out of the stone near his feet. I kicked at it with my boot, and it retreated, but I could see more shapes gathering just beneath the surface. Listen to me, I told the climbers. We're going to rappel down one at a time. Don't touch the rock face any more than you have to, and don't listen to anything you might hear. I set up a rappelling anchor and started sending them down one by one. Each person that left the ledge seemed to make the remaining spirits more desperate. By the time I had 3 people safely on the ground, the entire cliff face was writhing with trapped souls. As the 4th climber started down, Samuel Crowfoot's hand burst out of the stone right next to me. You came back? He said, his voice full of hunger. Now you can take my place like you were supposed to. His grip was even stronger than before. This time, I felt my body being pulled toward the rock face, like the stone itself was becoming soft and ready to absorb me. Let me go. I struggled against his grip, but more. Hands were emerging all around me. The last climber was screaming as gray fingers tried to grab his rope. That's when I understood what I had to do. Samuel, I said, stopping my struggle. I'll make you a deal. His gray eyes looked surprised. What kind of deal? I'll take your place willingly, but only if you let these people go and promise never to take anyone else. Samuel's grip loosened slightly. You'd do that? You'd enter the stone prison forever? Yes, but I want to speak to whoever's in charge. The oldest spirit, the one who makes the rules. The rock face grew quiet. Then a new voice spoke, older and deeper than the others. I am Standing Bear, first of the stone prisoners. I was judged for my crimes in 1847. What do you offer? My life, freely given, to become permanent guardian of this prison. In exchange, you let these climbers go and never take another innocent person. Only the truly guilty from now on. Standing Bear was silent for a long moment. You would do this? You would sacrifice yourself for strangers? It's my job to protect people. This is just a bigger version of that job. The lightning flashed again, and I could see Standing Bear's face clearly through the stone. He looked wise but infinitely sad. Your sacrifice would be acceptable. But know this. Once you enter the stone, you cannot leave. You will be conscious but unable to die, watching over the prisoners forever. I looked down at the last climber, still dangling on his rope with gray hands reaching for him. Below, the other rescued people were safe on the ground. I understand, I said. I accept. Standing Bear nodded. Samuel Crowfoot, release the climbing rope. This woman has chosen to take your place. Samuel let go of the fourth climber, who quickly rappelled to safety. Then all the gray hands except Samuel's retreated into the stone. Are you ready? Samuel asked me. I thought about my husband David, about all the people I'd helped over the years, about the climbers who would come to this cliff in the future. If my sacrifice could keep them safe, it was worth it. I'm ready. The stone beneath my feet became soft like wet clay. I felt myself sinking into the rock face, the limestone flowing around my legs, then my waist, then my chest. It didn't hurt. It was almost like being embraced by something ancient and patient. As the stone closed over my head, I heard Samuel's voice fading into the distance. Thank you. I'm sorry for what I did all those years ago. Then everything went gray and quiet, and I became part of Raven Rock forever. The rescue team found all 5 climbers safe at the base of the cliff, but they never found me. My gear was discovered neatly arranged on the ledge where I'd made my last stand, just like Marcus Webb's had been years before. The official report listed me as a climbing accident victim. They said I must have fallen during the storm and been swept away by the floodwaters at the base of the cliff. They searched for 3 days, but never found a body. Joseph Crowfeather came to my memorial service. Afterward, he went to Raven Rock alone and placed tobacco offerings on the stone. He told the spirits that I had been a good person who died protecting others, and he asked them to honor my sacrifice. From inside the stone, I could sense his presence and his words. It was comforting to know that someone understood what had really happened. Being part of the rock is strange. I'm conscious and aware, but my body doesn't exist anymore in any normal sense. I can see and hear everything that happens near the cliff, and I can communicate with the other trapped souls, but I can't move or leave. Samuel Crowfoot was released as promised. I felt his spirit rise up out of the stone and disappear toward whatever comes after death. Over the next few months, several other longtime prisoners were also allowed to move on, people who had genuinely repented for their crimes. But some stayed, the truly evil ones, the ones who would still hurt people if they were free. My job is to keep them contained and make sure they never escape. Standing Bear taught me how to maintain the prison's power, how to keep the dangerous spirits locked away while allowing the reformed ones to find peace. It's not an easy job, but it's important work. The stone prison still exists, but it's different now. We don't take innocent people anymore. The rules have changed since my arrival. Only those who are genuinely guilty of terrible crimes get pulled into the rock, and only when they come here of their own free will, driven by guilt or seeking some kind of twisted redemption. Rock climbing at Raven Rock is actually safer now than it's been in decades. The cliff face is stable, the gear holds properly, and no one has disappeared since 1987. Most climbers just think it's a beautiful, challenging route with some interesting Native American petroglyphs at the base. But sometimes, late at night when storms roll through the mountains, sensitive people can still hear voices in the stone. Not desperate cries for help anymore, but something else. Hope, warnings, maybe, or promises that someone is watching over the mountain. Joseph Crowfeather visits every few months. He's getting old now, but he still brings tobacco and sage, and he tells me news from the outside world. He says the Seneca Nation is working with the Park Service to protect sacred sites throughout the forest. He also tells me about the climbers who come to Raven Rock. Good people, mostly, who just want to challenge themselves against the stone. They don't know there's someone watching over them, someone making sure their ropes hold and their protection stays solid. I miss being alive sometimes. I miss the feeling of wind on my face and the satisfaction of a good day's work. I miss talking to people and helping them in person instead of just watching from inside the rock. But I don't regret my choice. Those 5 college students went home safe to their families. Hundreds of other climbers have enjoyed Raven Rock without knowing how close they came to ancient dangers. The truly evil spirits remain contained, unable to hurt anyone ever again. And every time I prevent an accident or guide a lost hiker to safety, I remember why I became a ranger in the first place. To protect people. To make sure they go home safe. Some jobs last longer than a lifetime. Some responsibilities are worth any sacrifice. And some cliffs will always need a guardian, watching from the stone. My name is Elizabeth Grayfall, and I'm still on duty.